We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! The video for today will be the part 7 of What If Naruto Traveled to the World of Harry Potter. The trust of a child is a fragile thing. Naruto becomes disenchanted with Konoha and the Sandaime Hokage when he stumbles upon the truth of who and what he is on his 8th birthday. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 28, Murphy's Law. Saturday, August 2, 2003, afternoon. Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Harry tried not to fidget impatiently while he waited in line to grab his team's next mission. He'd drawn the short stick that morning when Kotetsu decided that he was bored enough to want a mission outside of the village. Normally, Yamato would be the one to pick up a new mission for their team, but the Jounin had been sent out of the village on a high-priority mission not that long ago. Before the Jounin had left, the 3 Chunin had been given permission to either take gate duty or take missions for the month that Yamato expected to be gone. They had originally opted to take gate duty since it would have been a rather nice change from their intense training sessions and the grueling missions that Yamato inevitably rustled up for them. Kotetsu had lasted a full 2.5 days of gate duty before he cracked under the strain of boredom and declared that he needed to be entertained. The end result was that the 2 older Chunin had pulled the age and experience card and sent Harry to fetch them a C-ranked mission that would take them out of the village for at least a week. Eventually, the line of shinobi in front of Harry waiting to collect a mission for the day dwindled until Harry was standing in front of the mission desk facing Irika and the Hokage. Konnichiwa, Hokage-sama, Irika. Hey, Takashi, Irika replied with a smile while the Hokage absently grunted a response as the older man flipped through his paperwork. What brings you here today? I thought that you were on gate duty with Kotetsu and Izumo. Kotetsu decided that he was bored and the 2 of them promptly volunteered me to collect his entertainment in the form of a mission that involved travel and a week or two's worth of vacation time out of the village. I'm surprised that Kotetsu lasted as long as he did. He hates gate duty. Irika quipped with a laugh that Harry echoed as the older Chunin flipped through the list of C-ranked missions still available to see if he could find an escort mission. As he was waited to see what Irika could find, Harry found his attention diverted by the arrival of Team Kakashi. The 23-year-old wizard soon found himself being glomped by all 3 genin. The 3 teens, or near teen in Naruto's case, behaving as if they hadn't seen Takashi just 6 hours earlier when they'd eaten breakfast together. Keishi and I, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be on gate duty? Naruto demanded once the trio of genin had settled down and released the Chunin. I am and I was, but Kotetsu got bored and after a short team meeting, I was drafted to pick up a mission that we could take instead. Here you go, Takashi. I have a C-ranked mission to escort Tazuna the bridge builder back to Nami no Kuni and guard the bridge he's building from a gang of local bandits. Sounds perfect. Travel, a seaside vacation, and entertainment all rolled into one, Harry commented with an amused snort as he accepted the scroll from the Chunin. That should keep Kotetsu happy for at least a couple of days before he grows bored again. The other shinobi present laughed over that declaration since they were all aware of just how short of an attention span Kotetsu had and how easily he grew bored. Once their amusement faded, Irika signaled for Harry's client to be brought in so that he could be introduced to the Chunin. Harry turned to face the door when it opened to reveal his team's client and the wizard took a moment to intently study the bridge builder. The man was easily in his 50s or 60s with pewter gray hair that stuck up in disordered spikes about his head, an equally gray beard and mustache that were neatly trimmed, and small oval glasses that looked too small for his face and were obviously intended for reading based upon how low they sat on his face and how comfortable he appeared with them there. He wore a sleeveless dark gray tunic belted around his waist, a white towel draped around his neck, and tan pants that ended mid-calf. The man was also very obviously drunk despite the fact that it was only 2 in the afternoon. The man didn't improve Harry's first impression when he opened his mouth and drunkenly demanded, "You're sending me with a trio of wet behind-the-ears gaki. I requested a team of shinobi, not a team of children. The midget in orange doesn't even look like he could scare a squirrel, let alone a bandit." Harry growled in response to the insult directed at his cousin but was prevented from verbally threatening his client when the Hokage spoke up first. "Please do not insult my shinobi, Tazuna-san. All of Konoha's shinobi are trained professionals that are more than capable of doing the jobs for which they are hired, and we diligently work to assign each mission to the team or individual that is most suited to handle our clients' requests, regardless of their age. That said, Team Kakashi was not the team that has been assigned to escort you back to Nami no Kuni. That honor was given to Team Yamato. Sandaime Hokage-sama, no insult was intended. I was just shocked to learn that children were allowed to become shinobi. Shinobi are not made overnight, Tazuna-san, they begin training from the moment they show an interest in learning the shinobi arts, the Hokage pointed out after silently acknowledging the man's apology. The aged shinobi then signaled for Harry to step forward as he continued, "This here is Takashi, he is the chunin in charge of the team escorting you back to your bridge." The Hokage's declaration that Harry would be leading the team was enough to snap Harry out of his anger, and he cast a startled glance at the older man before he adopted a blank mask as he turned back towards his client and stated, "Please allow me to escort you back to your hotel while we discuss the mission details and our travel schedule. Will I get to see you before you leave, Mizan?" Naruto asked loudly as Harry began herding his client out the door. "Most likely, Naruto-kun, unless you leave the village on a mission before I get home," Harry replied, and he had to suppress a smirk when he saw Tazuna flinch and grow pale as the man immediately realized that the kid he'd insulted was related to the man in charge of the team that had been assigned to escort him home. Once they were clear of the building, Harry let his focus shift to the upcoming mission as he inquired, "How many people are traveling in your group, Tazuna-san? And did you arrive in Konoha on foot, or do you have a wagon with you to carry supplies?" "It's just me, and I walked to Konoha. I didn't come to purchase supplies, I came to hire someone to stop the bandits and thugs that keep harassing my workers." "Roughly how many bandits are we talking about?" "I don't know, a few dozen at least," Tazuna replied with an unmistakable undertone of bitterness while he twitched and fidgeted nervously. "Their boss is pretty ruthless too, threatening anyone and everyone to get what he wants and unafraid to have those that dare to defy him beaten and executed. And I take it that he sees your bridge as a rather major act of defiance on your part?" Harry asked leadingly as he watched the man out of the corner of his eye. "Yes. What are the chances that the bandit leader had you followed the moment he knew you were leaving to hire help?" "I don't know. I didn't tell anyone other than my foreman, my family, and one friend where I was going, and I slipped away in the dead of night. I never saw anyone following me and no one attacked me on my way here. So basically a 50-50 chance, since whoever was sent might have trailed you just to see where you were going and what you were doing instead of killing or capturing you while you traveled," Harry mused to himself before he fell silent as he carefully considered the situation until the two of them arrived at the hotel where Tazuna was staying while in Konoha. "Thank you for answering my questions, Tazuna-san. I will meet you right here at 6:45 tomorrow morning in order to introduce you to my teammates. Please do not be late as I would like to leave Konoha as soon as the main gates open at 7. "Hi, Shinobi-san," Tazuna agreed with a wince in response to Harry's desire to leave so early in the morning. "Ah no, Shinobi-san, you do know that I didn't really mean those things I said earlier about your otuto, any?" Harry purposefully gave the man a blank look before he walked away. He might not maim the man for insulting Naruto, he was a client, after all, but that didn't mean he wouldn't let the man sweat for a bit. The only reason he hadn't once considered pranking the man was because of the fact that the Hokage had basically told him that he'd be leading the mission, meaning he had to be on his best behavior and stay focused on the mission. That was probably one of the reasons why the Hokage did it, Harry thought to himself as he headed for the ranch in order to prep one of his wagons for the journey to Nami. There was no sense in leaving Konoha on foot when any potential hostiles would expect them to be traveling on foot. As he walked, Harry created 4 Kage Bunshin and sent one to let Kotetsu and Izumo know they had a mission, one to start gathering non-perishable supplies, such as extra weapons, and the final 2 to keep an eye on his client through the night to make certain the man wasn't harmed while inside of the village. After taking another 2 steps, he created one more clone that he sent to warn Arata and Eri of his pending mission. He'd barely taken 2 more steps before he paused and wondered when he'd stopped thinking of his cousin as Dudley, and he supposed it probably had a lot to do with how thoroughly his cousin and his wife had embraced their new life. That realization made Harry wonder if there would ever come a day when he shed his old identity completely, or if he'd forever cling to the last remnant of his old life, his name, until the day he died. As he started walking again, Harry let his thoughts swirl around everything that his birth name meant to him, what that name represented to him, and the bonds that had been formed during his first 19 years of life under that name. As he reached the next intersection, Harry stopped once more and stared off to the west, towards the portal, towards the doorway to his past and to the world he left behind. He then made his way up to the nearest roof and let his eyes take in the village that had become home to him at some point during the past 22 months. Harry shelved his contemplations when he realized that he was wasting time and sunshine directly to the ranch so he could enlist the help of his elves in preparing the horses and wagon he'd be taking. While he was there, he checked on the mares that were carrying foals, on the foals that had been born within the last 6 months, and the yearlings that were almost ready to begin their training. He even stopped to give attention to a few of the Neasels and Neasel mixes that were running about the ranch, some of the latter descendants of Torah and the rest, descendants from the few strays that Harry had taken in from around the village. After visiting with the 5 elves that ran the ranch, Harry popped over to the farm to ask the 5 elves there to prepare enough food for 10 people for a full month. They could supplement their supplies with fresh meat and fish as needed, but the situation with the bandits probably meant that there would be little in the way of fresh produce and grains to be found when they reached their destination, and Harry preferred not to tax the local supplies. Food and transportation set, Harry made his way back to his flat above the Namikaze wheelhouse in order to pack his personal supplies and dig out a set of portable ward stones to protect their camp at night. Halfway home, Harry found himself with company in the form of Yuzuki Yugogo. Harry greeted the vivacious Kunoichi warmly as he tried to suppress the rush of emotions the woman's presence had begun to stir in him ever since he'd first saw her without her ANBU mask. His track record with romantic relationships was deplorable, and while he knew there was no chance that Yugogo was a fangirl, he just couldn't bring himself to ruin the friendship he had with the purple-haired Kunoichi. It didn't help that his experience was so limited when it came to the fairer sex and relationships. That didn't stop his heart from skipping a beat whenever he heard her voice, it didn't stop his stomach from doing backflips when she smiled at him, and it didn't prevent his eyes drinking in her beauty each time he saw her. "You're preparing for a mission," Yugogo stated without preamble as she fell into step with him without breaking her stride. "Hi," Kotetsu was bored. "That doesn't surprise me, though I am surprised it took him this long to grow bored with gate duty. He originally wanted a break from Yamato's grueling training between missions, and I think he enjoyed the downtime in front of the gate for the first 3 hours before he began sighing dramatically and twitching nervously. I think the only reason that he didn't say anything sooner was the fact that Izumo flat out told him he wouldn't last a day on gate duty before he got bored." Yugogo laughed, and Harry found it infinitely harder to ignore the growing crush he had on the younger woman. He glanced sideways as a small, lopsided grin tugged at his lips in response to the fact that he'd been the one to make her laugh, his eyes tracking the wild swaying of her long, purple hair as he tried not to think about the way his fingers itched to run through that glorious mane of silken threads. Pupilless chocolate eyes dancing with amusement met his for the briefest moment before Harry shifted his gaze forward while a slight flush crept up the back of his neck, over being caught staring. "Where are you going, and how long are you going to be gone?" Yugogo asked once her laughter trailed off. "Nami no Kuni, and will probably be gone at least 2 weeks if not closer to 3, depends on how long it takes for the client to finish his bridge," Harry replied in a low voice after letting his eyes sweep the immediate area for potential eavesdroppers. "We'll have a small bandit infestation to deal with, but for the most part we'll just be standing watch over the unfinished bridge to make certain nothing happens to it or the workers that are building it. So, basically, you've just traded guard duty at the main gate for guard duty on a bridge?" "Yep, makes me wonder if Kotetsu will appreciate the irony." The Kunoichi laughed again, and Harry was torn between feeling inordinately pleased with himself for amusing his crush and castigating himself for letting her laughter affect him. He hadn't quite brought his emotions under control when the two of them reached the wheelhouse and Yugogo bid him goodbye after ordering him to be careful on his mission. He watched her go for a moment before he sighed and made his way around to the back of the restaurant where the stairs leading up to the living suites were situated. He had a mission to prepare for. Sunday, August 3, 2003, morning. Traveling though Hai no Kuni. Harry whistled a jaunty tune under his breath as he scanned the road in front him from Felix's back while one of his Kage Bunshin drove the wagon and another 2 Bunshin trailed along behind the wagon, all 3 clones hinged to look like random people. Kotetsu and Izumo were hinged to look like children and were currently running along the road in front of Harry to scout the way forward. Tazuna was sulking inside of the wagon, the man less than pleased that Harry had sealed away his sake first thing that morning before he told the man to get in, sit down, and shut up, though his exact words were far more politely worded. The wizard wasn't quite certain which had upset the man more, the fact that Harry had taken his booze or the fact that Harry implied he didn't want to see or hear from the man for the duration of the trip. There was a method to his madness though. he wasn't taking the risk that Tazuna would be spotted by one of the bandits if the man had been followed all the way to Konoha. To further the deception, Harry had left behind 2 clones, one of them henged as Tazuna, to hang about the gates for another hour or 2 before his second clone, henged as a Weasley, escorted him out of the village near 10. That would give any potential stalkers a visible target to focus on and allow Harry to place close to 8 miles between them and the potential watcher. The clones would then dispel at the end of the first day's travel in order to make their trail completely vanish to further confuse any potential stalkers. Some might think that Harry was being overly paranoid, but the wizard hadn't survived for as long as he had by ignoring his hunches, and his survival instincts had only been further honed during the past 2 years. Even if there was no one following the bridge builder, taking precautions meant that any scouts watching the routes into Nami would be less likely to spot Tazuna returning. Having his 2 teammates disguised as children also meant that their group would have a better chance of being dismissed as relatively harmless. The first day of travel would pass uneventfully with the group camping off the road near sunset. Tazuna's mood improved a bit when he was allowed out of the wagon after Harry warded their camp against intruders of the 2-legged variety. The second, third, and fourth day passed by without any trouble as well, and the group made excellent time. On the afternoon of their 4th day of travel, Harry set up camp early and made the ward slightly more permanent, as he'd be leaving both the wagon and the 2 Shire horses behind as they continued on foot. There currently no way to get the wagon and heavier horses across the water available to them. One of Harry's elves would see to it that both the camp and the horses remained undisturbed and well looked after once they continued on their way. Before sunrise on the 5th morning, Tazuna led the trio of shinobi to a secluded cove where the man had made arrangements to meet up with his friend in order to hitch a ride back across the ocean to the small island country. There was a small argument when Tazuna's friend saw Harry leading Felix, the wizard currently using the Andalusian, as a pack horse, and refused point-blank to carry the horse in his boat. Harry gave the man a disdainful look before he led the gelding out onto the water, the magical chunin circulating his chakra through the soles of his feet, his horse's hooves, and the first 2 inches of the water that sat directly beneath their bodies in order to create enough surface tension for both of them to walk on the water. He couldn't extend his chakra enough to escort more than 1 horse over the water that way, and it wouldn't work for non-living objects like the wagon, but a single pack horse or an unburdened Shire horse was doable. He probably could have created an ice bridge to take the wagon over, but that would have required far more magic than he wanted to expend right that moment. Kotetsu and Izumo were both doing their best not to laugh at the 2 civilians as they openly gawked at Harry leading a horse across the ocean surface. The 2 older chunin then climbed into the boat. They would ride with the client in order to watch over the man while Harry scouted the way forward. Once the boat was moving, Harry disillusioned himself and Felix so they wouldn't be as noticeable. He couldn't do much for the chakra aura he was putting out, what with the way he was circulating his life force through himself, the gelding, and the water, but he was at least able to contain the chakra to a 10-foot circle, just large enough to cover both himself and Felix, using the specialized seal and rune containment ward he'd created that prevented anyone from sensing his chakra unless they crossed over the barrier. The ward was something that Harry had cobbled together using a combination of seals and runes after learning the hard way just how large of a beacon his massive chakra reserves represented during one of his joint training sessions. The size of the field was usually smaller, but the inclusion of his mount meant that the field more than doubled in size. Naruto also had a pendant bearing the same seal and rune combo that he was required to wear when he left the village on missions for pretty much the same reason. Harry would get his first glimpse of the half-finished bridge 3 hours after first setting foot on the ocean, and he was mildly impressed with the sheer size of the incomplete structure. He couldn't help but marvel over the engineering feat of creating something so massive with the limited technology that he'd encountered since entering the elemental countries. He also had to admire the sheer audacity that Tazuna had in designing, financing, and building such a large structure while thumbing his nose at the local band of thugs that were terrorizing Nami no Kuni. Harry would be far less impressed with the bridge builder once he learned that the man had lied about the mission details and the exact nature of the threat that the trio of chunin would be facing. The mage scanned the small, fog-enshrouded cove where the boatman had delivered Tazuna and his 2 teammates with jaded green eyes. He'd been twitchy and irritable since he'd spotted land a half an hour earlier, and he wasn't certain if it had to do with the attitude of Tazuna's unpleasant friend, if it was the thick fog that had rolled in out of nowhere, or a premonition, such as the one he'd felt in the days leading up to the bandit ambush on his family's journey to Konoha, that was bothering him. There was also a nagging sensation at the back of his skull telling him that he was overlooking something important. Knowing better than to ignore whatever it was that was unsettling him, Harry dropped the disillusionment charm and formed a couple dozen Kage Bunshin the moment he stepped onto dry land and had all of the clones henge into different insects, animals, and birds before he sent them out to explore the island and search for the bandits. He then created another 8 shadow clones and had 3 of them henge into copies of his teammates and the client before he sent them on ahead to scout their trail with a 4th clone. The final 4 were given a set of ward stones and told to stick close to Tazuna, so they could throw up a quick barrier around the old man the moment it looked they would run into trouble. Feeling paranoid much, Takashi? Kotetsu inquired as he watched the decoy team disappear into the fog. Can it rightly be called paranoia if they really are out to get you, Kotetsu? Harry countered without missing a beat as he recast disillusionment charms over the entire group and tied the spells in such a way that they could still see one another through the spell, a nifty little trick the Japanese magicals had taught him. Besides, something isn't right. We should have seen at least one bandit patrol or at least seen evidence of their passing by now, especially if there are as many bandits as Tazuna suggested there were. Or his buddy could have just dropped us off at a point that is off the beaten path from their usual patrols, Izumo pointed out logically as he joined the other 2 alongside of the client. The 4 of them then began following in the wake of the decoy team that Harry had sent on ahead. If this was a larger island, I'd agree with you, but this is a small island and the leader of the bandits is bound to be worried about someone sneaking a small army in to arrest them. There is no one to hire an army, Tazuna interjected miserably. The daimyo's family, and anyone who spoke up against the group's leader were murdered 2 years ago when the thugs first arrived. Scraping up the money to hire a group of shinobi from Konoha was hard enough. Be quiet. Harry hissed softly as he stopped in his tracks and held up his hand to stop the others. The decoy has just been attacked but I don't know who it was that attacked them. Only 1 clone was dispelled from behind. Harry trailed off as another clone was dispatched and he scowled over the information he'd just learned as he turned to face his teammates. Kyuso, the decoy was attacked by a single missing nin. Either of you recognize the name Momochi Zabuza? Chikushu, Zabuza is known as the Kirigakure no Kijin, Izumo cursed as he too scowled. He's listed in the bingo book as an A-rank criminal, he's a Jounin-level shinobi, a former member of Kiri's ANBU Corps, and one of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shishininshu. Rumors also place him fleeing from Kirigakure 5 years ago after a failed assassination attempt on the Yondaime Mizukage along with a handful of other including the Oni, Kyudai, the latter of whom are both Chunin-level missing nin, Kotetsu added as he frowned at their client. Funny, I don't recall there being any mention made of missing nin being involved in this mission, Harry commented in a deceptively light tone with the slightest undercurrent of irritation as he glanced at their client. We will be discussing the fact that you withheld important information once we've reached the relative safety of your home, Tazuna-san. Since the involvement of known missing nin indicates that this mission was improperly ranked by the mission desk. What are we going to do about Zabuza? Izumo asked as he searched the mist for any signs of their enemy. He's bound to have realized the group he's been killing is made up of nothing but clones by now and he'll be looking for us. He's only killed 2 of my clones so far and as far as I could tell from the memory of the second Bunshin, he hadn't noticed that first one he killed was a clone. The fog hid the dispersing smoke. Though that will probably change soon, if it hasn't already, since the lack of a body will be quiet telling, Harry absently stated as he looped Felix's reins around a low-hanging branch on a nearby tree that was well off the road before he addressed the 4 clones still with their group. Set up a 15-foot perimeter off the side of the road and then make certain that both Felix and our client stay inside the safe zone while we deal with the problem. The trio of Chunin stuck around just long enough to ensure that their client was secure, Harry asking Minato's spirit to stick around and help keep an eye on the man. Harry then led the other 2 towards where the decoy group had been ambushed by Zabuza. They arrived to find 8 extra clones facing off against 4 Zabuzas, 3 of which had to be solid clones, while the decoy clone hinged to look like Izumo protected the Tazuna look-alike. Harry immediately realized that the 8 extra clones had either been created by one of the remaining 2 decoys or they were part of the group he'd sent out to explore the island. We're going to have to take him alive, Harry grimly pointed out in a low voice that wouldn't carry far. We'll need whatever information we can pull from him in regards to what is going on here because I don't trust our client to be truthful at this point. I can take him down and keep him down, but the method I plan to use won't work on clones, and if the real one sees me attempting to take down a clone, he will know to dodge. Izumo can trap them all with his Mijuim Nabera, and then we can help you dispel the clones the old-fashioned way, Kotetsu suggested as he pulled the 2 giant kunai from his back and passed one to Izumo. He's from Kiri, he's bound to have a far better grasp of Sandaime Hokage no Waza than I do, which means that he will be able to easily counter the syrup. Harry countered with a shake of his head. I'll make another 4 clones and have them each target one of the enemies from behind with a low-powered Raryuden in order to dispel the clones, and then the 2 of you can harry the original and keep his attention on the 2 of you so that I can sneak up behind him and drop him. Both older Chunin nodded, and Harry quickly created the required clones and assigned each of them a target before he disillusioned them in order to make them harder to notice. Once they were sent after their targets, Izumo and Kotetsu split up and circled around the area using the trees until they were on opposite side of the fight from Harry and from each other, so that when they attacked, Zabuza's back would be to Harry, giving him a clear shot at the other man. Harry then watched the plan unfold as his 4 clones attacked at the same exact moment just 5 minutes after they'd split up. 2 of Zabuza's clones exploded in a shower of water as the raging dragons of lightning slammed into them from behind, while Zabuza and his remaining clone managed to escape from the attacks by the skin of their teeth. Even just taking out the 2 clones was a big help though, as all 12 of Harry's Kage Bunshin on the field, bar the ones hinged as Izumo and Tazuna, split into 2 groups to attack the 2 remaining Zabuzas. The instant that the 3rd water clone was dispelled, Izumo and Kotetsu rushed out of the trees to attack what they believed was the real Zabuza. The first indication that the final Zabuza on the field was nothing but a clone came when Kotetsu dispelled it with a swing of his giant kunai. At the same exact moment, Harry was nearly sliced in 2 from behind as the real Zabuza attacked him directly. Harry avoided the killing blow by a hair's breadth when he'd sensed the man's sword entering his personal space and had thrown himself out of the tree he'd been hiding in, before he spun around to face his opponent. I had wondered when you'd be brave enough to actually show yourselves, Zabuza taunted as he sent another 4 Mizu Bunshin to keep Izumo, Kotetsu, and the rest of Harry's clones busy before he immediately attacked Harry with another swing of his sword. I wouldn't have bothered, but I just had to see for myself if you were really as ugly as you appeared to be in my clone's memory. Harry fired back in response as he ducked under the swung at the very last second and rushed closer to Zabuza as he brought his wand up to bear, casting a silent full-body bind curse on the man. The spell unfortunately missed its target when Zabuza knocked Harry's aim off by shoving Harry's wand arm up with his free hand. Harry was then forced to apparate away when Zabuza attempted to trap him using his large sword. No need to allow himself to be taken as a hostage or potentially killed so easily. He reappeared not too far away and fired off a chain of offensive spells that were designed to put an opponent down as quickly as possible. Any one of the spells guaranteed to disable a person no matter where the spell connected. The problem with most of the spells that Harry was using was that they were all visible and therefore easy for Zabuza to dodge or deflect with his sword. Do you really think you can take me down with such a pitiful little display of pretty lights? Zabuza demanded as he batted away yet another stunning spell before he dodged a sizzling blue light. Pitiful? I suppose it would seem that way to you, but I have no need to pull out any of my more devastating moves when I can keep this up for days without needing a break or breaking a sweat. In fact, all I have to do is tire you out enough for one of my jutsu to land or give my teammates enough time to finish off your clones and help me take you down in a more conventional way, Harry replied without letting up the steady stream of curses, hexes, and jinxes he was firing. The real reason that Harry hadn't bothered to use his shinobi skills was because he'd had no way of knowing whether or not he could have gone toe-to-toe with the unfamiliar Jounin. He also refused to take any chances because even the smallest mistake could mean death for both him and his teammates, not to mention their client, and he'd never forgive himself if he left Teddy and Naruto virtually alone, though he knew Arata and Eri would still take care of both boys. Plus there was the fact that his death would unleash half of the Kyuubi and he'd really rather not be responsible for the destruction of an entire island, and who knew how many deaths. Zabuza snarled beneath the bandages that covered the lower half of his face, and Harry knew he'd touched a nerve with his declaration. The wizard smirked as Zabuza tried to skewer him with a half-dozen kunai in an attempt to disrupt his casting. Harry merely caught the 6 blades and whipped them back at the man in rapid succession without breaking his stride, or his spell chains, much to the other man's annoyance. Next, Zabuza attempted to put enough distance between them in order to cast another jutsu, but Harry hounded him endlessly, preventing him from having enough time to fully form all of the hand seals required for whatever jutsu he wished to use. Harry then upped the ante as he began operating randomly around the man in order to make it harder for the man to predict where the next attack would be coming from. The way Harry continued chaining his spells together seamlessly even as he moved from place to place meant that he was raining a steady barrage of attacks on the other man, from all sides, and eventually the man failed to block or dodge from one of the many colored bolts of light. As the flash of pink washed over the man's left elbow, he grunted and staggered like a drunken sailor. He'd been hit with an impairment jinx that warped all 5 of the senses to the point where a person couldn't function. The next spell to connect was the disarming spell, followed quickly by a summoning charm to remove the man's weapons. He was just about to cast the stunning spell when a rain of senbon flashed through the air and Harry cast a wide area banishing charm to prevent any of them from striking their target. He then quickly dropped Zabuza with a stunning spell, causing the clones the man had made earlier to collapse into puddles of water. Kotetsu and Izumo made their way to his side while Harry's Kage Bunshin began gathering up Zabuza's many scattered weapons that had been flung away alongside of the senbon. A second rain of senbon was sent their way and Harry again banished the attack. "Show yourself or I will attack you instead," Harry ordered loudly in hopes of drawing out their unseen attacker while he, Izumo, and Kotetsu scanned the surrounding trees for any sign of the individual. "Thank you for taking care of Zabuza, now please step away from the body so that I may collect him," a masked shinobi ordered in return as he appeared in the tree closest to where Harry was standing over Zabuza. "Ah, no, I don't think so, I'm not finished with my prisoner yet," Harry countered without any hesitation. Kotetsu and Izumo both became more than a little nervous as Izumo tugged on his sleeve and hissed, "Takashi, that's one of Kiri's hunter neens. He won't take too kindly to you stepping between him and his target." "No, I'm not buying it," Harry stated as he stared up at the masked shinobi who couldn't be more than a few years older than Naruto. What kind of hunter neen would stupidly attack the group that took down his target instead of announcing himself first in order to avoid being skewered? As soon as the words left his mouth, the masked shinobi cursed and attacked them. The fight wouldn't last more than 20 minutes as Kotetsu and Izumo hounded the masked team while Harry took 2 minutes to secure their prisoner behind a set of protective wards before joining in the fight. This time, he had to be far more careful with his casting, lest he take out one of his own teammates instead of the fake hunter neen. The battle ended and Izumo tripped their opponent by catching him in his Mijueme Nabara for a split second and Harry used the opportunity to wrap the teen in conjured ropes and chains before operating directly behind the teen to stun him in the back. "Told you," Harry drawled as he glanced up at his now sheepish teammates. "How'd you know he wasn't the real deal?" Kotetsu asked curiously as he helped Izumo start removing all signs that a battle had been fought in the area. "I was told that hunter neens always traveled in groups of 4 or more," Harry replied as he recalled Minato's many lessons on the way each of the various Kages ran their villages. "A team of hunter neen would have shown themselves to us either before we engaged their target so that we could all work together and not get in each other's way, or right after we had subdued the target. They would not have wanted there to be any chances of their target escaping in the confusion if our team confronted their team. They also would not have attacked during the middle of the fight when we would see their attack as interference or an attempt to help the target escape." Nothing more was said as Harry summoned the masked shinobi's weapons and sealed them into a scroll alongside of Zabuza's weapons, including the Kubikiri Bucho. He then ordered 2 of his clones to take the place of the 2 that had been dispelled earlier before he sent the decoy team on their way in the event there was another ambush waiting for them somewhere down the road. The remaining clones then hinged back into animals, birds, and insects before scattering back into the forest to continue their original objective. The last 2 things that Harry did before Trio headed back to where they'd left Tazuna was to secure both prisoners in a conjured wheelbarrow with a tarp over top of them and create an additional clone to push the wheelbarrow. No sense in letting their employer and any other co-conspirators know they'd been captured. Chapter 29, Confessions and Legends. Thursday, August 7, 2003, afternoon. Tazuna's home, Nami no Kuni. The rest of the journey to the bridge builder's house passed by unimpeded with the decoy arriving safe and sound at the clearing where Tazuna's house had been built before. One of the 4 dispersed itself to let Harry know they had arrived. The remaining 3 clones stuck around to inform the occupants of the house, a young woman and her son, that they would be arriving soon and to make certain the house wasn't attacked before the group arrived. By the time the group reached the house, Harry was in a fine temper. His thoughts dark as it occurred to him that if he hadn't arrived first the afternoon he picked up the mission for his team, then it could have been Naruto's team that had been caught up in the client's lie. Kakashi had warned him the morning prior to grabbing the mission that he'd be taking the three kids on another C-rank mission after their morning training session the next day. Kotetsu, will you take Izumo and one of my clones with you to interrogate our client while I ward the clearing against hostiles and set up accommodations for our prisoners? Now see here, you can't go ordering me about in my own home, Tazuna protested weakly. Urusai, Tazuna-san, you've caused us enough problems by lying about the original mission, Harry snapped angrily as he glared at the man. The thing that pisses me off the most though is how close my Otoko's team came to being assigned this mission in our stead. And nothing infuriates me more than having my family placed in harm's way. The best thing you can do at this point, Tazuna-san, is come clean with the complete truth, Izumo pointed out as he gently grabbed hold of Tazuna's elbow and began steering the man towards the front door of his house. Lying again at this point or withholding even the smallest scrap of information will only make matters worse in the long run. Harry watched as the man deflated and allowed Izumo to shuffle him off into the house. Kotetsu waited until they were out of sight before he asked, "Are you certain you don't want help securing the area and the prisoners? For that matter, don't you personally want to question the client? I can make as many clones as I need to help me deal with setting up the wards to protect the house and clearing as well as help me deal the unconscious prisoners," Harry pointed out as he began unloading the pack Felix was carrying. "And as much as I'd love to question Tazuna, it is far better that I am not involved lest I skin the man alive. I'm far too pissed with him to think rationally around the man right now. Besides, having one of my clones listening in will let me hear the entire thing anyway." "Alright, I'll dispel your clone the moment we're done," Kotetsu replied before he left Harry to his work and randomly snagged one of Harry's clones to drag along to deal with the client. Harry sighed and shook his head before he created another 30 clones, 20 of which he set to drawing and hanging the temporary tags he'd need to ward the entire clearing. He selected another 4 clones to set up the temporary ward stones around the house to add a second layer of protection. The rest of the clones were then left to stand guard over the 2 prisoners while he used the Elder Wand to build a small prison to house them in out of transfigured pebbles, all the while wishing that Yamato had been with them on this mission. And it wasn't just Yamato's Mokuton abilities that Harry was missing. The man was a damned good shinobi and a great captain, when he wasn't being driven up a wall by pranks. Once he finished with the prison, Harry checked on the progress of the clones warding the clearing before he sent the clones that had set up the ward stones into the prison to draw chakra suppression seals in each of the 8 holding cells he'd created inside of the small prison, the extra cells intended for any additional prisoners they picked up. They would also line the walls and the corridor in the center of the horseshoe of cells with silencing wards to prevent the prisoners from talking with one another or hearing anything that was said outside of their cells. While they were doing that, Harry created portable suppression seals that would be placed directly on each prisoner along with a hybrid rune and seal tag that would paralyze the prisoners from the neck down without affecting their internal organs. Another hybrid tag would vanish their body waste so that the prisoners would not have to sit in their own filth as well as save the 3 chunin from the need to clean up after their captives, something that would also decrease any chances of the prisoners escaping during such a cleanup. The sun had nearly finished setting by the time both prisoners were securely ensconced in their private cells. Both man and teen were secured to an inclined metal bed that was attached to the back wall of their cell with the tags sealing their movements and chakra safely attached to the middle of their backs beneath their clothes where they wouldn't be easily noticed or removed. The positioning of their beds was such that both prisoners could be fed without needing to release them. It would also allow Harry to use magic to interrogate the pair, by using legilimency, drawing their memories directly from their minds, or dosing them with Veritasirum. That was also about the same time that Kotetsu and Izumo finished questioning Tazuna in regards to the information that the client had withheld about the mission. The moment the memories of that discussion hit Harry, he began cussing up a storm as he immediately understood the exact nature of the situation they'd stumbled upon in Nami no Kuni. It took him a few minutes to calm down enough to figure out just what information he would need to pull from their 2 prisoners and decide which would be the quickest and easiest way to get that information. 20 minutes later, Harry was manipulating the unconscious Zabuza's subconscious mind with keywords and the help of a few potions, a calming draft, a memory enhancer, and Veritasirum to name a few, while he used his wand to siphon off copies of all the memories associated with each keyword. Each collection of silvery memories was then temporarily stored in hurriedly labeled vials until he could set aside enough time for him to separate them into individual vials for permanent storage. Once he finished gathering Zabuza's memories, a process that took close to 2 hours, Harry repeated the process with the unnamed teen. By the time he finished gathering the teens' memories, Harry was feeling rather exhausted. He'd expended a considerable amount of magic over the course of the day between the earlier fights, setting up the prison and the wards, and drawing out the memories of 2 unconscious people. An invigoration draft washed away his exhaustion and would allow him to stay awake long enough to meet with his teammates to discuss their mission and write a letter to the Hokage. Harry had barely stepped outside of the makeshift prison when he found himself face to face with his teammates. The 2 older men had brought him supper when he didn't show up at the meal earlier. Harry accepted the plate of food as he led the pair further away from the house towards a fallen tree where they could hold their discussion in privacy. As he ate, Harry listened to his teammates dissect everything they'd learned from Tazuna. After he finished his food and once the pair were finished talking, Harry in turn informed the pair that he intended to interrogate the 2 prisoners once they woke up in order to gather what information he could, the wizard not yet willing to let the shinobi know about his ability to draw out memories. "Are you thinking about dropping the mission and returning to Konoha?" Kotetsu inquired the moment the wizard fell silent. "According to the rule book, we're supposed to, but you and I both know that if we do, then it will reflect badly on both our team and on Konoha. Especially if the client gets killed the moment we leave," Harry replied wearily as he dug out a blank scroll to start writing the letter to the Hokage. "If we had been ambushed closer to Konoha, we could have taken the matter back to the Hokage, but it's a little too late now. However, because we know exactly what is happening now, we can send a message back to the Hokage outlining the situation and see how he wants to handle the matter from his end while we do what we were hired to do. True, we just wanted to make certain that you knew that since you are technically the team captain for the duration of the mission," Izumo stated as he eyed Harry a moment. "Chances are the Hokage suspected something was off about the mission in the first place, but it's hard to say just how much he might have known about the situation through Konoha's spy network. What plans have you come up with for protecting Tazuna, Tazuna's family, Tazuna's workers, and the bridge?" Kotetsu asked after giving Harry a few minutes to digest the information that the Hokage might already be aware of the situation. "Tazuna and his family will be secure within their home now that I've set up a perimeter barrier, and 2 of us can escort Tazuna to and from the bridge each morning while one of us remains to provide an escort for the man's daughter and grandson if they need to run any errands. The bridge can be warded the same as Tazuna's house, which would make protecting the workers relatively easy while they are working on the bridge. Protecting them while they are traveling or when they are at home is going to be a bit more difficult though, and warding all of their homes isn't practical. I could create enough clones to provide each of the workers with an escort to and from the bridge, but that won't save them from another shinobi." Harry paused for a moment at that point before he continued, "The best way to protect everyone though, would be to hunt down and capture Gato before dealing with his hired thugs and any other missing nin he has on hand. I just don't know how big of a problem taking control of Gato Corporation would cause for Konoha. If you take him down quietly, then you could potentially make it look like Gato willingly retired and handed the reins of the company over to your client, who in turn could turn the company over to Konoha in repayment for lying about the mission details," Minato's spirit suggested as he made his presence visible for the first time since they left Konoha. "That would depend on whether or not Gato Corporation is a legitimate business or if the business is just a front for illegal activities. The Hokage should have information on Gato Corporation and Gato Senshu. If he doesn't, then Jiraiya undoubtedly will have dirt on both the man and his company due to how much time the Sennin spends outside of the village," Izumo interjected as he took the ghost's sudden appearance in stride, both older Chun and Long used to the spirit popping up unexpectedly whenever they were around Harry. "We could easily kidnap the man now, replace him with a clone, have the clone order his men to let Tazuna finish his bridge, and interrogate the man while we wait for the Hokage's reply and information about Gato from Jiraiya," Harry suggested as he considered the problem while he finished up the letter he'd written and locked the scroll with a privacy seal. "That would reduce the chances of an all-out attack while the bridge is still under construction. Gato's abrupt change of heart would be questioned by a number of people though," Kotetsu stated with a slight frown. "Not if we have the clone imply that he wishes to take over the bridge in order to charge those who use it an outrageous toll fee. Actually, why wasn't Gato planning to do that all along? Why destroy the bridge completely when he could make far more money by allowing Tazuna to build the damn thing, before he took control of it? Unless there is something else the man is afraid will happen if the bridge is built." Nami no Kuni is an archipelago of islands that formed over top of an extinct volcano roughly 200 years ago. The island was originally used as a base of operations for a notorious band of pirates and smugglers led by a rogue shinobi from Kirigakure no Sato until Yuzushiogakure no Sato raided the base and killed their leader 85 years ago, Minato explained as he shifted slightly closer to Harry. There have long been rumors that the plunder the shinobi-turned-pirate hoarded prior to his death remains hidden below the islands in the network of volcanic tunnels that riddle the island. Whether or not there is any truth to the rumors is debatable, but that hasn't stopped would-be adventurers and thieves from searching for the tunnel entrances in hopes of claiming the treasure. What happened to the rest of the pirates? Harry inquired curiously over the small anecdote. Were all of them killed in the raid, or did some of them escape? According to the story that Kushina told me, very few of the pirates were actually killed during the raid aside from the leader and his closest associates. The survivors of the raid then swore to give up their thieving ways in exchange for clemency from Uzushio and were therefore allowed to remain on the island. The small island was considered part of Yuzu no Kuni from that point forward until Yuzu was razed to the ground towards the end of the Second Great Shinobi War. The former pirate stronghold escaped mostly unscathed and accepted a small number of refugees from the former island nation of Yuzu no Kuni. Nami no Kuni was established as an independent nation a year after the end of the war under the rule of a daimyo whose origins were unknown. The two most prominent rumors at the time were that the first daimyo was the son of the pirate leader or that he was the only surviving grandson of Yuzu no Kuni's daimyo. The country had remained fairly isolated for the duration of the Third Great Shinobi War but began building a shipping empire to support itself right around the same time, as the war ended. Konoha cultivated close ties with the island nation almost from the moment it was birthed in order to prevent Kiri from getting a foothold so close to the main continent. Fascinating, Harry murmured as he allowed his imagination to run wild with the tale for a moment before he snapped his attention back to the matter at hand. I wonder, what are the chances that Gato is seeking the fabled treasure of the long-dead pirate king? It would certainly explain why he wouldn't want a bridge to connect the island to the mainland, since a bridge would allow for far more glory hounds and treasure hunters to reach the island, whereas right now he controls the waters surrounding the island and therefore controls just who sets foot on the island. Or, he's using the old tunnels to hold any illegal goods he's been smuggling or selling and is worried about treasure hunters stumbling upon his ill-gotten gains and thinking they found the treasure, Izumo countered logically. And a far more likely scenario, Kotetsu agreed as he nodded his head. Not to mention the fact that the bridge would allow those people discontent with his rule to flee the island in droves. Maybe, but it's definitely far more boring than imagining that Gato is some mentally brain-dead idiot bound and determined to dig up an entire island just to find a bunch of rotting silks and tarnished copper coins. Harry snorted as he climbed to his feet and stretched until his back popped several times. Chikushu, why didn't I think of that? Kotetsu complained theatrically as he palmed his face in mock despair. Anyway, I'm going to spam the area with clones before I camp out on the roof of the makeshift prison for the night. I'll leave the two of you to spend the night in the house to watch over the family and make certain they don't go sneaking off in the dead of night. We'll see you in the morning, Takashi, Izumo called after him as the wizard walked away. Harry absently waved at the pair in response without looking back before he formed another 100 clones that were ordered to stand watch and shine directly to the roof of the prison. He then summoned his pack from where it was sitting beside the pack saddle and other items Felix had been carrying and laid out his sleeping bag. After that, he sent a clone to check on Felix and summoned one of his elves to deliver the message he'd written to the Hokage. The last thing he did before he crawled inside of his sleeping bag was to put away the glass discs he'd been using to work on his chakra control, a training exercise he'd never stopped despite how far along his control had come. Once he was lying down, Harry fell asleep almost before his head could touch his pillow. He was woken by one of his many clones shortly after dawn. The prisoners were both awake. Harry took the time to change into a clean set of clothes and grab a couple bottles of water and some fruit from his pack before he dropped down to the ground to visit Zabuza and the as yet unnamed teen. He made his way to the teen's cell first and slipped inside after making certain the 4 clones he'd left inside to watch over the prisoners were all present and accounted for. They were. Harry then made his way to the side of the bed and sat in the chair provided so that the paralyzed teen could see him. What have you done to me? Where is Zabuza-sama? The rather effeminate teen demanded in a raspy voice the moment his brown eyes landed on Harry. Would you like a drink? Harry asked instead of acknowledging the boy's questions. Where have you taken me? What do you want with me? Where is Zabuza-sama? I'll assume that you aren't thirsty then, shall I? Are you hungry? What have you done to Zabuza-sama? Harry sighed and set the bottle of water on the table beside the chair along with a couple pieces of fruit before he climbed back to his feet and stated, the guards will check on you again in a few hours. If you grow thirsty, you've only to let the guards know when they open the door and they will give you a drink. They will also feed you if you grow hungry. Chikushu, why won't you answer my questions? The wizard ignored the question and exited the cell. As much as it pained him to ignore the kid, he knew he couldn't treat him like a harmless civilian. The teen had tried his best to kill him and his teammates. He wouldn't mistreat the teen, he still had some morals after all, but he also wasn't going to play nice and try to make friends with the boy. Once the kid stopped making demands and once he'd had a chance to view the memories he'd pulled from the teen, he would ask the kid a few questions to see if he'd cooperate. The rest of the time, all he intended to do was ensure that the kid didn't escape and that he was fed and watered regularly for the duration of the mission. Harry checked on his clones briefly as he moved further into the prison to where Zabuza's cell sat at the very back of the small building. He then slipped inside of the cell to find Zabuza ranting and raving under his breath. The man was apparently far less composed than his accomplice and more than a little pissed about waking up in a prison cell in his current condition. And when I get my hands on that green-eyed bastard, I'm going to rip his intestines out through his nose and shove them down his throat until he chokes on his own guts. Interesting threat, Harry drawled around a dark chuckle as he walked up to sit in the chair beside Zabuza. I'm going to enjoy hearing your screams as I kill you as slowly and as painfully as possible, Zabuza snarled as he rolled his eyes in Harry's direction. I don't know who the hell you think you are, but you won't keep me here for long, and once I am free, you are a dead man. Help, someone save me, my life has been threatened. I'm so terrified now, Harry deadpanned in a flat voice as he crossed his legs and slouched back in the chair, the wizard the perfect picture of boredom. Why, you little runt? I'm going to gut you like a fish. Harry sighed and withdrew his wand in order to pour several gallons of near-freezing water over the man in order to get him to shut up. Once the man was silent, Harry stopped the waterworks as he asked, Did you get enough water or are you still thirsty, Momochi-san? Fuck you. Sorry, I'm not interested in ugly and stupid. When I get my hands on you. Another deluge of icy water hit Zabuza in the face until he shut his mouth before he stated, If all you intend to do is threaten and insult me, then I will leave you to your confinement. If you think that playing mind games with me is going to get me to spill my guts, I don't need to make you spill your guts, Momochi-san. I've already pulled everything I need to know directly from your mind while you were unconscious. I simply came to visit you to make certain that you were fed and watered since you missed both lunch and supper yesterday. Your little accomplice provided quite a bit of information for me as well. You lie. Haku would never betray me. Zabuza spat as he attempted to kill Harry with his eyes. Do I? Harry inquired as he casually dried Zabuza and the floor of the excess water before he set the remaining water bottle and the rest of the fruit on the table beside the chair. Personally, I think you should have requested twice the amount of money from Gato and demanded half of it up front before you agreed to work for him. We both know the man was going to try and screw you over once the job was finished anyway. Well, I don't suppose that it really matters now anyway since you're my prisoner and there is no chance of you finishing the job. Zabuza's curses and threats followed Harry from the cell until the moment he stepped through the door. He sighed softly as he glared back at the closed cell door before he turned to address the clone standing guard in English. Keep an eye on both prisoners and see if you can get them to eat. If they haven't eaten anything by supper time, let me know and I will give them a nutritional potion to encourage them to eat the food they are offered. Don't answer their questions, don't ask them any questions besides whether or not they are hungry or thirsty, and don't give them any information or assurances no matter what. The clones all saluted Harry in unison as he turned and left the building. Once back outside, he took a few minutes to stretch and run through his usual morning calisthenics. After that, he headed back up to the roof to collect his things and pull out a set of glass discs to slip into place for his chakra control exercise before he went to check on Felix to make certain that the horse had been properly cared for during the night. He then spent another half an hour sorting through the handful of clone memories he'd received during the night, most of them regarding the layout of the island, the deplorable state of the few villages that were on the island, and potential leads on locations for the bandit hideouts. Kotetsu exited the house about that time to see if he was up and to let him know that Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter, had made breakfast. Harry thanked him and headed inside to officially meet the last two members of Tazuna's family since he'd not had the chance the day before, aside from when his clone was introduced. Tsunami was only about 5 or 6 years older than Harry and she was a pretty woman despite the dark smudges beneath her eyes, the worry lines that had formed on her brow, and the load of long-held fears that weighed down her shoulders. She was also a decent cook when one considers the limited supplies she had on hand. Well, her supplies had been limited until Harry and his team arrived, as they'd brought extra supplies with them that they had willingly shared with the family. Harry had suspected that things would be bad based upon what Tazuna had said about the bandits the first time he'd spoken to the man, but he hadn't really been prepared for the full-out poverty that the entire island was experiencing, if what he'd seen so far was any indication. As he ate breakfast, Harry drew the young woman into a conversation regarding the state of the island, drawing more information about the inhabitants that lived on the island, not counting Gado's hired thugs, the types of jobs the people performed to support themselves, when they were not being repressed, and what resources were still available for the people, barely any because of the bandits. Once he'd finished eating, Harry thanked Tsunami for the food before he sought out his teammates so they could plan out their day while they waited for Tazuna to get up and get moving. After a short debate, Izumo was selected to stay at the house and watch over Tazuna's family and their prisoners with the help of Harry's clones for the morning, while Kotetsu and Harry went with Tazuna to the bridge. The reason Harry was one of those going to the bridge was so that the wizard could set up the protective wards that would prevent anyone from attacking the bridge directly. His clones were exceedingly useful in getting the wards set up along the finished portion of the bridge quickly. A few well-placed rocks that had been carved with runes and seals saw the empty stretch of water between the current end of the bridge and the projected end of the bridge, where it would connect to High no Kuni, being protected as well. While the clones worked, Harry observed the workers that showed up but left Kotetsu to chat up a few of them to get a feel for what they were thinking as a group. The older Chunin was far more personable than Harry. Both shinobi made it a point to never leave Tazuna alone completely with any of the workers, in case one was a shinobi or thug in disguise or a civilian that had been paid off by Gado to kill the bridge builder and who had slipped onto the bridge before the wards had gone up. By the time they returned to the house for lunch, 3 workers had quit, the men breaking under the stress, and 2 thugs had attempted to sneak onto the bridge. Watching the 2 thugs bounce off of the wards 2 or 3 times before they realized something was keeping them off the bridge had been highly amusing for those that had witnessed the spectacle. Harry and Kotetsu had quickly apprehended the thugs after they stopped entertaining the duo, and more than a few of the workers. After they had been incapacitated, Harry created a dozen clones to haul the new prisoners back to their temporary prison. Once lunch was over, Izumo left with Kotetsu to escort Tazuna back to the bridge, accompanied by 2 dozen Kage Bunshin disguised as pebbles for backup, in case they were visited by more thugs or needed to get a hold of Harry quickly. Harry then spent an hour searching the new prisoners' minds before he created a pair of clones to take their place, both to prevent word of their capture from spreading and to gather more information. The rest of his afternoon was then spent viewing and sorting Zabuza's memories while his clones kept watch over the house and helped Tsunami with a few chores, such as replacing the missing or broken tiles from the roof and catching fish for supper. Tazuna's angst-filled grandson made a few appearances, though the kid never once spoke to him. The boy obviously uncomfortable around the 3 shinobi, but Harry most especially for some reason. Supper brought with it a response from the Hokage regarding the mission. Takeshi, the situation in Nami no Kuni is far graver than rumors led me to believe, and I appreciate the prerogative you have shown in getting what information you have discovered to date to my attention as quickly as you did. After careful review of the facts you provided, the parameters of your original mission have been altered to reflect the current situation. 1. Investigate the local branch of Gado Corporation and determine the end goal that Gado Senshu hopes to achieve in regards to Nami no Kuni. This includes confirming that Gado was in any way responsible for the deaths of the daimyo and the daimyo's family. 2. Once you've finished investigating Gado Corporation, you are to take Gado Senshu into custody and confiscate any assets or merchandise that the company is holding in Nami no Kuni. Please be certain to collect any and all documents during the confiscation process, especially those that implicate Gado and Gado Corporation participating in any illegal activities. 3. A detailed status report on the current living conditions of the citizens of Nami no Kuni is imperative so that Konoha can send the necessary supplies and staff to relieve their suffering once the situation with Gado's hired mercenaries has been resolved. 4. Finally, you are to follow through with your original mission objective. As for the information that you requested on the history of Gado Corporation and any rumors about Gado Senshu's life and habits, I have sent an urgent message to Jiraiya requesting that he send you that information through the same method that allowed me to send this reply to you. Please keep me informed of any new information that comes to light during the course of your mission. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure. Harry stared at the letter for a full minute before he wordlessly passed it to Izumo, who would in turn pass it to Kotetsu once he was finished reading it. When Kotetsu placed the scroll back in his hand, it quickly disappeared into one of the many hidden, and magically protected, pockets of his cloak where it would not get lost or stolen. The meal was tense as the three civilians nervously watched the three shinobi once it became apparent that they weren't going to share any of the information that had been in the scroll that had appeared out of nowhere just as the meal was being served. How self-service was both efficient and convenient, and those crafty little buggers sure knew how to hide themselves in plain sight. Once the meal was over and Inari, Tezuna's grandson, had disappeared to escape the tense atmosphere, with an unseen clone in tow to watch over him, Harry placed his elbows on the table, threaded his fingers together, and propped his chin on his thumbs as he addressed the father and daughter duo. As you might have surmised, the scroll that I received earlier was a letter from the Hokage in response to the report that I sent to the Sandaime last night. Will the three of you be leaving now then? Tezuna asked in a voice that only wavered once. No, but as you can imagine there have been changes made to our original mission and your cooperation will be paramount in our efforts to fulfill the original mission. Request that you filed on top of our new tasks that the Hokage has assigned to our team. We will help you in any way that we can, Tezuna hurriedly stated in sheer relief as he flicked his gaze between the three shinobi while his daughter seemed to wilt in on herself now that she was no longer so tense with fear. I'm glad to hear that, Tezuna-san, Harry replied with an almost smile that was far friendlier than the blank stares he usually gave the man. I would appreciate it if you would start by telling us the names of any witnesses that were present when the daimyo's family was murdered. A list of names of those people that were executed by Gato or his thugs and those people who have disappeared since Gato arrived, and a rough census of the citizens that are still in Nami no Kuni. We'll need a total number of people not involved with Gato broken down into age groups and a list of illnesses and injuries that any of your fellow citizens are suffering from, if known. Izumo and Kotetsu were soon writing down the information that Tsunami and Tezuna were providing, including the names of those individuals that would have more information, so they could to gather as much information as they could about Gato, Gato Corporation, Gato's hired thugs, and the current state of each village on the island. Chapter 30, Kidnapping, Thievery, and Impersonation. Monday, August 11, 2003, morning. Zabuza's hideout, Nami no Kuni. Harry tiredly took a sip of the polyjuice potion he'd had one of his elves fetch from beyond the barrier that separated the hidden countries from the outer countries, the potion currently laced with a few hairs from Zabuza, as his holly wand silently alerted him to let him know that 50 minutes had already passed. He'd gone the magical route for his disguise to limit the chances of his disguise being disrupted because he was too tired due to how little sleep he'd gotten since they had arrived in Nami no Kuni. That was on top of all the magic that he'd expended and the work he'd needed to do for the mission. And the last thing he needed was for his disguise to fall when he was surrounded by enemies. Beside him, one of his clones was currently wearing Haku's mask. The clone hinged since polyjuice didn't work on the clones. They tried, and because physically disguising a clone was pointless. Harry made an effort not to gag over the horrid taste of the potion. Essence of Momochi Zabuza had turned out to be far more disgusting than essence of Gregory Goyle. Who knew? Tucking away the vial of vile potion, Harry continued riffling through Zabuza's things to collect anything of value, whether it was monetary, intellectual, or political. There was a surprising amount of blackmail material lying about the room, all sealed into storage scrolls, of course, and Harry didn't hesitate to collect every last bit of it. He was well aware that some of the scrolls were fakes and were likely to blow up in his face if he opened them, but he knew exactly which ones those were thanks to Zabuza's memories. He was just sorting through the stash of medical supplies that Haku had made and collected when Gato and a pair of bodyguards burst into the room unannounced. You have a lot of nerve showing your face around here after failing to kill the bridge builder, Gato declared with a sneer as he took in the chaotic state of the room. Stuff it, Gato, there was no mention of us having to face a team of shinobi in our contract, Harry retorted as he reached up to place one hand on the wakizashi blade that was currently masquerading as Zabuza's sword thanks to a tricky bit of transfiguration. I successfully dealt with the Jounin that arrived with the protection detail, and once I've recovered from that fight, I'll be able to finish off the 3 worthless Chunin that remain alongside of the bridge builder. This is the first I've heard about you offing one of the wretched bridge builder's escorts from Konoha, Gato stated as he eyed the disguised wizard warily. Maybe you should find better spies. Harry mocked through the bandages that were wrapped around the lower half of his face as part of his disguise as he dropped his hand away from the sword's hilt to give the impression that he no longer considered Gato and his 2 thugs a threat. Humph, Gato grunted irritably. See that you do or our deal is off and I'll take your head to the bounty hunters to cash in on the bounty the Mizukage placed on your ugly mug to make up for your failures. Don't make threats that we both know you don't have the ability to follow through on, Gato. Harry hissed as he drew his fake copy of Zabuza's sword and waggled the tip of the blade beneath Gato's nose. Besides, I plan to deal with the problem right now. The moment the word now passed through Harry's lips, the clone disguised as Haku appeared to split in half as the clone created a second clone. Both clones then immediately attacked the two bodyguards that had entered the room and quickly disabled the pair after catching them by surprise. Harry in the meantime had silenced the room to prevent any other thugs from hearing the commotion and dropped Gato using a stunning spell with the wand he'd drawn while the man was focused on the sword tip beneath his nose. Harry worked quickly to secure his three newest prisoners after he created a couple of extra clones to guard the door so he wouldn't be interrupted by another shinobi or thug. Harry then set about grabbing the locations of Gato's main office and current residence, any passwords or security codes he'd need to access both locations, and a list of rooms to search for important documents or valuables straight from Gato's unprotected mind. 2 more mental trips, into the minds of the two bodyguards, netted him just sufficient information for him to send a trio of clones to effectively take the place of Gato and his guards. Portgees then whisked away the prisoners in order to prevent anyone from noticing them being dragged halfway across the island. Gato was too important of a prisoner to risk losing him to a chance rescue. He also couldn't risk someone figuring out that a clone had taken Gato's place before he could use Gato's spur-of-the-moment capture to his advantage. Prisoners taken care of, each of them dropped into a different cell where the clones he'd left behind on guard duty would apply the seals to their backs to secure them, and, the decoys set to take their place, Harry quickly finished packing up the rest of Zabuza and Haku's things so that he could get the hell out of there. A final argument and exchange of insults with Gato and his bodyguards took place once he was ready to go, after he dropped the silencing spell, in order to keep in character. The impersonators taking the place of Gato and his bodyguards then stormed out of the room first before Harry and the fake Haku followed in their wake. The other clone remained behind in order to keep watch for the missing Oni-Kyudai and any of the other rogue shinobi that Harry had learned were working with Zabuza. Harry was more than happy to get away from Zabuza's hideout in one piece. He'd never felt comfortable impersonating other people, even if he'd improved at it since the time he and Ron had snuck into Slytherin's common room back in their second year. He was just beginning to believe that his luck was turning around in his favor, since his bad luck had already struck at the start of the mission. What with the way the client had lied, when fate decided that the 3-day run of good luck had been more than sufficient. The latest snag. Harry ran right into the unaccounted for Oni-Kyudai. To top it off, his last sip of polyjuice potion wore off at the same instant and Harry was left trying to hold up the transfigured copy of Zabuza's pants in order to preserve his modesty while staring at the two suddenly hostile rogue shinobi. Yeah, he was seriously buggered. Apparition, finite charms, and lots of clones were a bloody lifesaver as Harry jumped away from the first attack with a loud crack, fixed his clothes, ripped off the bandages covering his mouth, and spammed the forest all at the same time. Once he no longer had to worry about flashing his opponents or tangling up his feet in his pants, Harry unleashed a torrent of spells on the two brothers as the adrenaline coursing through him washed away his tiredness. He also led them on a merry goose chase as far away from Zabuza's base as he could get in the hopes that none of the bandits stationed there would hear the sounds of battle and join in the fight against him. The insults he kept slinging at the pair ensured that their attention was focused solely on him and his clones, as well as kept them in a constant state of anger that prevented them from fighting with their brains, though it also meant that their attacks were rather brutal. It was almost like fighting a 2-on-1 spar against Kotetsu and Izumo, only with far less friendly banter and far more dire threats and promises of bodily harm. There was also a distinct lack of pranks being thrown his way while he still occasionally managed to fire off a prank spell in order to disable one of his opponents. Their reaction to Harry animating the razor chain, which was technically a shuriken chain, not that Harry cared what it was called, had been hilarious. The two brothers had freaked out when their chain had come to life and tried to strangle them both at the same time. At the time, the one with the clawed gauntlet on his left arm and the two horns on his Hitai-8 was still spewing forth tricolored bubbles each time he tried to speak, while the other brother had been covered in paint and painful boils. By the time Harry managed to incapacitate the duo, his left arm had been dislocated at the shoulder, elbow, and wrist, from when he'd been jerked by his arm in one direction and by his back in the opposite direction, and the pants he wore were soaked in blood, both his blood and that of the two shinobi. A quick self-inventory once the fight ended revealed 2 or 3 seriously bruised, or potentially cracked, ribs, numerous cuts and bruises, a couple of serious gashes, and a rather severe case of poisoning, from the brothers' gauntlets. That was on top of being exhausted from the intense fight coupled with his lack of sleep and a case of magical exhaustion. Harry cursed his decision to leave his dragonhide cloak behind when he prepared his disguise. Half of the injuries he had picked up could have been prevented if he'd been wearing the cloak. Securing the prisoners was left to his surviving Kage Bunshin before Harry portkeyed them to the final prison cell that he knew for certain was unoccupied, all the while lamenting on the fact that he hadn't thought to make more cells when he first created the prison. The injured wizard then swallowed a bezoar to counteract the poison before he wearily made his way back to Tazuna's house on foot. He could have traveled via magical means but he had no desire to make his injuries worse by attempting to apparate in such a weakened condition or worse taking a portkey, when he knew he wouldn't have a hope in hell of staying on his feet when he landed. Luckily, his legs and feet had escaped all but a few bruises and shallow cuts, so walking wasn't exactly the effort of agony it could have been. Still, each step he took jarred his injured arm and sent burning spikes of pain through his chest courtesy of his injured ribs. His entire repertoire of verbal curses was exercised fully and expanded upon, in 3 languages, during the course of the journey. By the time he reached the safety of the ward surrounding the clearing that Tazuna's house sat in, Harry was only moving through sheer stubbornness. It helped that all of his superficial injuries had already been dealt with by his magic and the Kyuubi's chakra that was flowing through his veins while most of the poison in his system had been neutralized by the bezoar. If only it could have done more for his arm and ribs, and the blood loss and exhaustion. He hadn't thought to bring along any of his healing potions that he usually kept in his dragon hide cloak when he set out to infiltrate Zabuz's base though. He was just lucky that he'd thought to stuff a bezoar in his pocket before he'd left Tazuna's house, a decision prompted by the fact that high number of Kiri's shinobi were well known for their use of poisons. "What happened to you?" a young voice demanded in an appalled tone. Harry slowed to a stop and swayed on his feet as he attempted to focus on Tazuna's seldom seen, by Harry at least, grandson as he tried to remember the kid's name. Eventually, he gave up the effort in futility as he fell heavily to his knees when his vision began swimming in and out of focus. As the boy's wide-eyed, and more than a little horrified, face filled Harry's limited field of vision, he finally rasped out an answer for the kid. "I was doing the job that your grandfather hired me for, kid." Harry ignored the kid's screams for his mother as he tumbled face first to the ground when he lost his battle against the pain and exhaustion. He never fell into true unconsciousness though as he stubbornly refused to allow a single one of his many clones scattered about the island to vanish and give away the game, when they were currently winning. Instead, Harry fell into a part of his mindscape that he'd never visited before and found himself standing in what looked a lot like the maze of pipes leading into the Chamber of Secrets. He stared at the strange reddish-orange colored water pooling around his feet for a moment before he turned his attention to the hundreds of iridescent blue threads that were firmly wrapped around his left arm, each one symbolizing an active link to one of his clones. A few simple thoughts directed at those connections saw the wavering ones strengthened until Harry was certain that none of his clones would dispel because of his current physical health. Once that was dealt with, Harry began wandering through the underground network of tunnels in order to occupy himself while he waited for his body to heal, enough for him to wake up and sleep. "Where exactly are we?" Minato's voice unexpectedly demanded as the man's spirit shimmered into being beside the Chunin's inner avatar just a few minutes later. Harry glanced sideways at his long-dead cousin as he replied, in English out of habit due to the setting appearing inside of his mind, "Somewhere inside of my mind. Though it's not a place that I've ever visited before, well at least not this version of these tunnels. I've definitely been inside the actual place that this place has been modeled after. I can't really say that I'm pleased to be here again after all of this time, even if it is within my own mind." "Why are you here, anyway? You've never appeared in my mindscape before. I don't know why I'm here or even how I got here. One minute I was watching Tazuna's daughter rush to your side in response to her son's frightened screams and the next I found myself standing beside you down here in what looks like a sewer. Oh. How odd. I wonder if I accidentally pulled you in here with me because I sought to avoid falling into true unconsciousness in an effort to keep my clones intact. Anyway, we're not in a sewer, though I suppose that is not too far off from reality as we are standing inside a huge network of pipes. All of these pipes lead to the Chamber of Secrets beneath Hogwarts though, not to a sewage plant, or at least the original pipes did, not really sure where these ones lead to though. Now that I think about it, the pipes all seem to be curving inwards as if they were built in a spiral instead of the honeycombed maze I vaguely remember from my second year. Spiral. Minato parroted nervously as he apprehensively glanced in the direction that Harry had been walking in when he first appeared. You know, it might be best if you don't explore any further. What? Why? I don't think we ended up inside of your mind, Itoko. I think your fight to remain conscious sucked you into the seal holding the Kyuubi. That would certainly explain why I was dragged along, since I am connected to you through the Kyuubi and the seal that contains the demon. And if that is true, then the chances that your arrival here woke the portion of the Kyuubi sealed inside of you are rather high. It never ceases to amaze me when one of you pitiful and pathetic soft-shelled insects show a modicum of intelligence. A sinister voice declared from somewhere within the maze, the being's voice booming and echoing as the water and stone magnified the sound. You just had to tempt fate on today, of all days, didn't you, Minato? Harry growled without any heat as he quickly came to the conclusion that it had been the Kyuubi's subconsciousness speaking and that it was indeed awake. Sorry, I forgot your luck had been inversed for the day after you captured Gato. Come here, little worms. I wish to see my new jailer and the arrogant fool responsible for the 9 years of endless torment I suffered through face to face. The Kyuubi ordered in her booming voice. Well, we're here and we'll be here for who knows how long, and I'm just as curious to see the Kyuubi in person, and as the saying goes, in for a penny, in for a pound. Just for the records, I really think this is a bad idea. No good will come of associating with that monster. Thousands of ignorant witches and wizards said the same thing about my godson's father just because he was a werewolf, Harry replied in a clipped tone. And they were wrong. Remus never hurt anyone, and he went out of his way to protect people from his unpleasant furry side. There are always two sides to every coin, and the world is not painted in black and white. You, of all people, should know that. I do. I am also fully aware that the creature we are walking towards destroyed my family and nearly an entire village in a single night. And weren't you the one that told me that the person responsible for the Kyuubi's rampage was Uchiha Madara? Does that not imply that the Kyuubi had been used as a tool by Madara? That still doesn't negate the fact that the Kyuubi had continued to rampage even after I'd broken it free of Madara's control. True, but that also doesn't change the fact that the Kyuubi had every right to be angry. It had been used and imprisoned by Konoha since the first time Madara attempted to use the bijou in his revenge against the village. It's been nursing its anger and frustration for decades and extracted revenge the first chance it got, just like any other being would if it had been put into the same exact position. Fine, have it your way. I'll stop placing all of the blame on the Kyuubi, but don't expect me to pick up a stick and start playing fetch with the furball as if he was some oversized pet. Now you're just acting like a petulant 2-year-old throwing a tantrum, Harry dryly pointed out as the two of them finally reached the center of the spiral maze where the inner door of the Chamber of Secrets sat wide open to reveal Harry's inner projection of the chamber in all its glory. Harry hesitated just outside of the door for a moment before he turned to his cousin and stated, I think it best that you stay out here, Minato. I don't want to take any chances on you being drawn into the cage with the Kyuubi because of the connection you share with it. Minato looked horrified by the mere thought, and he quickly agreed, I have no problems remaining right here while you take a gander at your passenger. I've spent more than enough time trapped in a small space with that demon. For once I am inclined to agree with the irritating little flesh bag, the Kyuubi rumbled as she stirred within the confines of its prison when Harry stepped through the entryway and let his eyes take in the chamber. There were several differences between the original Chamber of Secrets below Hogwarts and the replicated Chamber of Seals, as Harry began referring to the inner chamber in order to differentiate between the two chambers, within his mindscape, or was it a sealscape if this was actually inside of the seal? First of all, the Chamber of Seals was brightly lit while the Chamber of Secrets had been bathed in shadows. Then there was the fact that the Chamber of Secrets floor was merely damp and moldy while the Chamber of Seals floor was completely submerged beneath a good 3 feet of reddish-orange water. The next difference was in decor. The Chamber of Seals sported fox statues and a huge cage at the far end, while the Chamber of Secrets had a snake theme with Slytherin's ugly visage looming over the rotten core from the far end of the room. The network of pipes that opened up off of the Chamber of Secrets were completely absent from the Chamber of the Seals. And of course, there was the fact that the Chamber of Seals didn't really exist, set it apart from the Chamber of Secrets, which did in fact exist despite rumors to the contrary. The only thing the hidden rooms had in common was the fact that they both housed deadly creatures that were larger than life. Well, that was only partially true since the basilisk had been dead for over a decade now. The spirit of the similarities still applied, though. Moving deeper into the enormous chamber, Harry took a good long look at the being trapped behind the cage within the chamber of seals. The giant fox had reddish-orange fur that made it appear as if its very fur was made up of flames when the creature's muscles shifted beneath its skin. It had long, rabbit-like ears, frightening-looking red eyes, and 9 tails that continually swung about behind the creature. It also wore a demonic-looking grin as it stared at Harry with overwhelming anger, hate, and hunger with just the barest trace of curiosity underneath the hostility. You positively reek of dead, dying, and decaying trees found deep within an ancient forest with the sharp scent of high winds, icy altitudes, and deep waters mixed in, the QB stated as it breathed deeply, and Harry wondered if he should feel insulted. You smell of home, and it is an unexpectedly pleasant scent to associate with a mere flesh bag. What are you? No mere human should smell of home to one such as I. And how is it that you've hidden all of your memories from me? I should have been able to pull your mind to mine from the moment that I awoke here in this chamber. I cannot even sense the whispers of your thoughts in order to learn your pathetic name. The name I am currently using is Namikaze Takashi, Harry replied as he fearlessly moved even closer to the cage. I have heard much about you since I first met my little cousin 4 years ago, but no one seems to know your name. Would you tell me your name? You have not earned the right to hear my name, Fleshbag. Fair enough, Fuzzball. You are a brave little worm, to insult me so. And you are the annoying soul fragment that insulted me first, Fox. Several times, I might add. I won't hold that against you this time though, since I know exactly how unpleasant it is to be shoved into a cramped prison against your will simply because you exist. You are also rather rude. You've not told me what you are or how you hide yourself from me. I am a wizard, though, if you wanted to get technical, I suppose you could call me a mage. You could also say that I am a shinobi, but sometimes it is still hard to think of myself as such, Harry absently answered as he drifted to a stop right outside of the QB's cage. As for how I'm hiding myself, it's fairly simple, it's magic. There is no such thing as magic, the QB insisted as it huffed in annoyance. Wow, you're a real stick in the mud, aren't you, Fox? I didn't think anyone outside of my maternal aunt and uncle could be that close-minded in regards to what they couldn't and wouldn't understand. I hate to break it to you, Fuzzball, but magic most certainly does exist. Prove it. Harry couldn't help the smirk that plastered itself across his face over the blatant challenge that the QB had just issued him. Pulling out a mental representation of the Elder Wand, Harry began by transfiguring each of the dozen stone fox statues, which were seated in dignified poses that gave them a regal air, into various amusing positions that made them looking like they were trained circus dogs. He then added insult to injury as he applied clown costumes to their new appearance, complete with makeup, fluorescent-colored fur, and silly hats. He next raised the floor at the center of the chamber to create a dais that would place him above the QB's eye level the moment he stood on it, with a low flight of stairs leading down to the cage. The newly raised section forced the reddish-orange-colored waters off to either side, where they soon formed a deep moat on either side of the raised section of the floor. After that, he created pipes that siphoned the waters, which he would later learn was actually the fox's chakra that the seal siphoned off from the fox, from the floor up to the ceiling, where the waters steadily poured out into twin waterfalls on either side of the QB's prison. Another wave of the wand deepened the moat off to either side in order to prevent the water from rising high enough to flood the chamber again, leaving the path from the chamber's entrance to the QB's cage clear. A different spell dried the floor and changed it from aged granite into polished marble. The next few flicks of his wand had the walls depicting defining moments of both Harry's and the QB's life, each scene painted larger than life with full color and amazingly intricate details, all of the scenes pulled directly from Harry's memories, his imagination, and the QB's memories. On the left-hand side were the murals and images that depicted his life, an image of James and Lily on their wedding day with Remus and Sirius in the background, a picture of James and Lily holding a newborn Harry, mural of the frozen tragedy of his parents' deaths coupled with his placement on the doorstep of the Dursleys by Dumbledore, and Harry's 11th birthday, with Hagrid and Hedwig. After that followed 7 more murals that highlighted each of his first 6 years at Hogwarts and the year he spent hunting the Horcruxes. Then came the final battle, another mural of his final year at Hogwarts, the night he rescued Naruto from his aunt and uncle, the moment he became a Jinchuriki, the day he adopted Teddy as his son, and a mural of the months leading up to the day they'd stepped through the portal. The next mural was of their travels across the elemental countries, followed by the picture of him and Naruto being given their Hitayate. The last three pictures depicted a mural of the year and a half Harry spent training under Yamato, the moment Harry was placed on a proper team, and a picture of Harry meeting the Kyuubi for the first time. The images on the right side of the chamber started with the image of a shadowy demon with 10 tails, a sharp silhouette of the Rikudo Sennin, a mural of all 9 bijou after they'd been separated out from the Jubi, the battle between Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara capturing the moment the Kyuubi was sealed into Uzumaki Mido, and the transfer of the Kyuubi from Mido to Uzumaki Kushina. Next was a poignant mural of the night the Kyuubi was torn from Kushina, followed by a detailed picture of the moment where the Kyuubi's soul was split in half. After that was a mural that represented the 9 years of torment that his half of the Kyuubi and Minato suffered together inside of the Shinigami's stomach, an image of the night the Kyuubi was sealed inside of Harry from the Kyuubi's point of view, and a picture representing the 4 years that the Kyuubi had slept peacefully inside of the seal. The very last image was Harry's meeting with the Kyuubi as seen from the Kyuubi's perspective from behind the bars of his prison. Both sides of the room had several blank panels where future moments of importance would someday be placed. Harry then turned his wand on the Kyuubi's cage. He started by widening the cage so that the Kyuubi had more than enough room to turn around. He then transformed the no longer flooded floor of the cage into thick loam and moss to make the Kyuubi's bed more comfortable. The walls of the cage were painted to look like a forest, and the ceiling became a weaving of tree branches through which the sky could be glimpsed, the sky set to cycle between day and night. The last thing Harry did to the Kyuubi's cage was to add a doggy door large enough for a medium-sized dog to pass through at the far right corner of the gate holding the Kyuubi in place. You expect me to believe that magic exists simply because you manipulated my prison in the same way that my previous hosts manipulated my prisons? Were any of your previous hosts able to draw your memories out of your mind without your permission? And did either of your previous hosts ever allow you to step freely outside of your cage? Harry asked in return as he made his way to the dais and created a comfortable pair of armchairs, a small chess table complete with wizarding chess set, and 2 side tables to hold refreshments. Do not lie to me, you have not opened the gate to free me. The Kyuubi bellowed as she, ignored the remark regarding her memories. I do not lie. All you have to do is stick your nose through the small door I made on the right-hand side of your cage, though I suppose it would be on your left, and you will be allowed to walk out of your cage and join me here on the dais where we can talk face to face. Are you mad, Harry? Minato demanded from where he was still hovering just outside of the entranceway, the man completely unaware that he'd used Harry's true name in his worry and anger. Shut up, Minato, Harry instructed without glancing back at his horrified cousin. There are restrictions and limitations, of course. For example, you will leave all but a slight trickle of your chakra behind the moment you step through the door, meaning you will have no power outside of your cage. You will also not retain your enormous size since I refuse to allow you the chance to seriously harm me or any other souls that may wind up here inside of the seal. Finally, you cannot pass out of the Chamber of Seals, as I've named this room where your cage resides. Then what is the point? The Kyuubi grumbled petulantly. The ability to freely move about in a much larger space and participate in activities that will help you to relieve the boredom now that you are no longer slumbering. The Kyuubi harumphed and turned around so that its back was facing Harry. Harry knew he still had the Kyuubi's attention though because one of the fox's 9 tails of destruction was currently prodding the gold flap of the doggy door that Harry had created. Harry politely ignored the Kyuubi's current insecurities as he conjured a tea set and let himself get caught up in the soothing familiarity of brewing a pot of tea. Once the tea was ready, he conjured up a plate of his favorite tea biscuits and some liverwurst sandwiches, the latter strictly for the Kyuubi, and poured out 2 cups of tea, well 1 cup of tea for him and a bowl of tea for the Kyuubi. It was as Harry was stirring the milk and sugar into his cup of Earl Grey that the Kyuubi finally gave into its curiosity and poked its nose out through the doggy door. 2 seconds later, a cocker spaniel-sized fox with bright red-orange fur, normal-sized fox ears, and 9 fluffy tails stood uncertainly at the foot of the cage. Wrapped around the Kyuubi's neck was a white collar with a complex string of blackened runes seared into it and a bright pink silk bow. Each tail sported an identical collar and bow. All 10 collars were linked to the seal imprisoning the Kyuubi inside of Harry in addition to being a visual manifestation of the spells that he'd used to repress the Kyuubi's full size. Those collars were also how he'd contained the fox's chakra inside of the prison it had just left, leaving a transparent, orange-colored image of the Kyuubi's original form inside of the large cage. Harry had to suppress the chuckle that bubbled up inside of him over how adorable the Kyuubi looked in its current form when compared to its original form. It was even harder to hide his amusement the moment the bijou caught sight of its reflection in the red waters pooling at the base of the twin waterfalls. "What did you do to me?" the Kyuubi wailed in an obviously feminine voice. "That was unexpected," Harry coughed as he choked on his tea. "I did not expect you to be female. I am not a female." The Kyuubi hissed in the same girlish tones. "Apparently this you is the feminine side of your original self. Makes sense since you are no longer the same person, there being that you were before you were split in half. I hate pink." The Kyuubi wailed and Harry burst out laughing over the fact that the thing that bothered the Kyuubi the most was that the bows on her collars were pink. Sharp teeth latching onto his ankle a few minutes later brought Harry's attention back to his surroundings, and his wand was soon poking the growling fox biting his ankle in the nose as all traces of amusement fled in the blink of an eye and his growled out an icy cold. "You will let go of me right this instant or I will transfigure you into a 9-tailed rabbit and permanently dye your fur bright pink. Laugh at me again and I will rip your throat out, worm," the Kyuubi threatened even as she rushed to release his ankle. "If you don't want me to laugh at you, then don't act like a 5-year-old drama queen. I hate pink. If you behave, then I may consider changing the color for you before I leave. Threaten me again and I'll paint this entire room and the inside of your cage all in shades of pink after I dye your fur pink and turn your collars into daisy chains of pink flowers." The Kyuubi sniffed as she thrust her nose up into the air and hopped up into the other chair so that she could snag one of the sandwiches that Harry had conjured for her. It wasn't real food, of course, but each sandwich did contain the memory of what an actual liverwurst sandwich would taste like. The two of them then sat there in silence while they enjoyed their refreshments, though the Kyuubi would deny enjoying anything given to her by a human, while Minato swore up a storm in the background and questioned Harry's intelligence and sanity with every other breath. "So, what do foxes like to do for fun?" Harry inquired as he watched the distinctly feminine Kyuubi scratch at her collar like a dog with fleas while ignoring Minato's hissy fit. "Hunt, kill, and mate." "Well, I refuse to help you with that last one, but I suppose I could figure out a way to have the Chamber of Seals provide you with squirrels, rabbits, fish, birds, lizards, and snakes to hunt. Maybe a second chamber off to one side so you can hunt the creatures in their natural habitat. I'll see what I can come up with so that the next time I visit I can give you a place to run and hunt. I would do it now, but I was exhausted before I arrived here and I probably shouldn't have spent so much magic altering the Chamber of Seals in your cage because I really couldn't afford to use so much magic. You are unlike any human I've ever bothered to take notice of before," the Kyuubi remarked as she lapped at the bowl of tea Harry had provided for her and watched the wizard with one crimson eye. "I have yet to meet two individuals that are identical in every way, regardless of what species they are," Harry absently remarked as his attention drifted to his memories, his eyes wandering over the murals and pictures representing his life on the left side of the room. "There may be similarities and we may all act a certain way in response to certain situations, but we are all our own persons and there is something inside of us that is unique only to us. That is what makes us who we are and not just a carbon copy of our ancestors." "You never did answer my question, why can't I view your memories?" "I could view the entire lives of my previous two hosts." "I did answer your question, you just refused to believe me at the time," Harry pointed out as he glanced at the fox from beneath his fringe. "My magic prevents you from accessing my memories while at the same time allowing me to view your memories. I have had 4 years to strengthen the walls that separate your consciousness from mine. Or rather your subconsciousness, since your consciousness technically resides within my little cousin. I demand that you allow me to see who you really are. I will know my jailer. And there is no way you can view my memories, you are nothing more than a soft-shelled insect. You can see glimpses of my life on the walls to my left, that is as much as I am going to allow you to see. I don't particularly care to share my mind with another, but I realize in this case it's my own fault since I didn't stop to think about the consequences for making demands of a being I knew nothing about. That still doesn't mean that I'm going to grant you free access to that which makes me, me. And the images opposite of my memories came straight out of your memories. You can try to deny it all you want, but the proof is in the pictures. You are an annoyingly stubborn flesh bag and I will make you suffer for your refusals to give me my due at the first opportunity. And I can lock you back into your cage permanently and make it a far more unpleasant place for you to stay than it was when I first arrived, fuzzball. Stop calling me that, the Kyuubi whined as she scowled at him. What else do you expect me to call you after you refused to give me your name earlier? You can call me Kyuubi-sama, the QB ordered, which made Harry snort in amusement and disdain. "Ah, no, not going to happen, I can't and won't call you that." "Maybe Q-chan." "Absolutely not. Momoro-chan, do you have a death wish, little worm?" "Well, would it really kill you to give me your name?" The QB glared at Harry, and the wizard was hard-pressed to keep from laughing because it looked more like the demon was pouting than actually glaring due to the cuteness factor of her current form. After a moment, the shrunken Bijou finally muttered out a petulant, "My name is Kurama." "It was a pleasure meeting you, Kurama," Harry sincerely replied as he felt his body pulling on his consciousness. "You were far different than I imagined you would be when I first learned of your existence. I have to leave now, but I have no doubt that we will meet again. In the meantime, I will leave you with a parting gift." Just before he disappeared from the mindscape of the seal, Harry flicked his wand to change the color of the bows on the QB's neck and tail collars from pink to gold, while the collars themselves were transformed into solid black bands to better hide the runes that powered them. He couldn't have the fox studying the runes involved and therefore learning how to pick them apart in order to break free, after all. Chapter 31, Reflections. Monday, August 11, 2003, evening. Tazuna's home, Nami no Kuni. 29-year-old Tsunami, daughter to the bridge builder Tazuna and mother to 8-year-old Inari, idly wrung the water from the cloth in her hands before folding the damp fabric and draping it over the forehead of the injured young man currently occupying her guest room. As she knelt beside the unconscious captain of the shinobi trio that her father had hired to protect his unfinished bridge and the people of Nami no Kuni, Tsunami's thoughts sifted through the memories of her interactions with the somewhat standoffish, if mostly polite young man. The first time she'd seen the man had been when the strange copies of the man, two of them pretending to look like other people, including her father, had knocked on the door in order to inform her that her father and the team of shinobi he'd hired would be arriving soon. The clone had also made it a point to assure her that her father was unharmed despite the perilous journey he'd taken to hire a team of shinobi. She wouldn't actually meet the man himself until the day after the small group arrived at the house. As she listened to the three shinobi interrogate her father in regards to Gato and the threat the island community faced that first night, Tsunami had been prepared to hate the emerald-eyed man for the things his clone said to her father. Her hate and anger had evaporated halfway through the conversation when the man's strange duplicate had responded to Tazuna's attempt to manipulate the men's emotions by bringing up Inari during the conversation. Her father had hoped to guilt-trip the shinobi to make certain they didn't abandon the mission. Tsunami will never forget the man's words or the tone he'd used when he addressed her father. "Oh, so you want to play that way, do you, Tazuna-san? Well, how's this for a guilt trip? I left behind my 5-year-old son in order to perform this mission. I'm not married to Tazuna-san, I'm the only parent my son has ever known, and you know what the saddest part is? I'm not even my son's biological father. I'm his godfather. You see, I adopted my godson when his grandmother died nearly 4 years ago. She was a proud woman in the prime of her life, but she lost the will to live after her heart was broken when her husband, her only daughter, and her son-in-law died one right after another within a 6-month period. My godson had less than a month with his parents before they died, and he was just over a year old when his grandmother passed away. Had you been upfront and honest about what this mission entailed, my team would have never taken it and you would have gotten a team with the experience necessary to deal with the problems here in Nami. Instead, you lied, and my little boy now stands a rather high chance of being orphaned for the 3rd time in his short life. That's not even considering the fact that I am also the guardian of my not quite 13-year-old cousin, whose parents died the night he was born. Are you going to be the one to explain to my son and my cousin why I won't be coming home if I die here on this island because of your lies, Tazuna-san? As a mother, Tsunami couldn't fault the man for resenting her father for lying about the situation in Nami no Kuni. She also couldn't fault her father for doing what he could to help the people of Nami. Dealing with the actual man, and not his clones, had been rather different than she had expected, since he was obviously much better at controlling his emotions than his clones. Takashi, as she'd learned he was named, was unfailingly polite if a little on the blunt side. He obviously didn't believe in mincing his words, though he didn't go out of his way to hurt people's feelings either. Tsunami also hadn't failed to note that the man was extra sensitive to Inari's moods, the man going out of his way to avoid appearing in any way threatening around her son after picking up on the fact that Inari was leery of him. Tsunami also hadn't missed the way her son snuck around and spied on the trio of shinobi when they were hanging about the house, particularly on Takashi and his odd clones. There were just so many of the solid but not real duplicates that they always seemed to be underfoot. She sometimes feared that her only child would one day declare an interest in becoming a shinobi due to some of the rather amazing and unbelievable feats the three men pulled off from time to time, like walking up walls or making things appear out of thin air. Each day that passed without that dire pronouncement from her little baby boy was another knife to the heart that was safely dodged. She could appreciate the shinobi for the things they've done to protect her home and her family, but she had no desire to see her only child grow up to be a killer or be left to wonder each day whether that day would be the last time she saw her son alive. Knowing how she personally felt about watching her son take up the life of a shinobi, Tsunami couldn't help but wonder how a young father could have taken up such a dangerous profession knowing he might one day leave behind a son. It had taken her 2 days before she gathered up the courage to ask the man why he continued to live the dangerous life of a shinobi if he was so worried about leaving his son and cousin alone. Takashi's answer had been just as startling as his response to her father's attempts to make him feel guilty. I could have chosen to take up the life of a civilian when I left behind my old life in order to move to Konoha so that I could watch over my cousin. For a while I toyed with the idea of becoming a businessman. In the end, I chose the life of a shinobi because it is not in my nature to stand aside and allow others to give their lives to protect me. I also knew that being a shinobi would allow me the greatest chance to protect my family. The life I chose also brought me that much closer to a part of my family that I never knew existed until the day my brave little Otoko turned up in my hometown all alone, and searching for his only surviving family. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how intense even the smallest connection to one's family can be for an orphan that grew up knowing nothing of who his parents were or what they did for a living. To finally make that connection has a profound effect on a person, and it offers them a measure of comfort in the icy abyss of living a lifetime alone. Following in the steps of my grandfather and my uncle alongside my cousin allows me a glimpse of what my life might have been like if I had been born in Konoha. I felt the same way when I followed in my parents' footsteps to attend the boarding school where they met and fell in love with one another. Takashi had then met her gaze as he finished with, "I have no desire to leave my son without a parent, but he will never be alone the way I was growing up because my cousin will be there for him to watch over him in my stead should I die. In the meantime, I will fight with everything I have to return home to my family at the end of each mission. That is just who I am and who I will be so long as I still draw breath." Tsunami's attention left her memories as her eyes fell once more upon the living flesh of the man who'd been filling her thoughts for so much of the past several days. He was a handsome young man, if a bit exotic looking, with his thin face, aquiline nose, pointed chin, full lips, high cheekbones, full eyebrows, wide forehead, round eyes, and rich green irises, a color she'd never before seen in the eyes of a living person. The dark bird's nest that doubled as the man's hair gave him a boyish appearance, while his tanned skin hinted at long hours spent beneath the sun. In contrast, the many scars that covered the man, Tsunami had seen most, if not all, of them in the course of treating the man's numerous injuries earlier that day, made him seem far older. As did the blank expression the man tended to wear all the time. Though the years dropped from the man's face when he smiled, something Tsunami had only glimpsed once or twice since he rarely ever smiled. There were times when the man's startling, and entrancing, green eyes led one to believe that he was positively ancient, though, as if he'd seen far too much in his lifetime and it had aged him beyond his physical years. And while she thought him attractive, she had no interest in pursuing him as a love interest. She'd already lost 2 husbands and she had no interest in allowing herself to fall in love with another man that would undoubtedly die young because of his chosen profession. Her thoughts then turned to the condition in which she, or rather her impressionable son, had found the man in just that afternoon. She'd been digging through the supplies Takashi had given her in an effort to plan that night supper when she heard her son screaming for her in absolute terror. She'd rushed outside to find several clones converging on an unmoving figure pooled at her son's feet. It wasn't until she reached Inari's side that she recognized the fallen man as a half-dressed Takashi, his trench coat and shirt missing, his pants soaked in blood, and his chest streaked with blood and dirt. She'd thought him dead until one of the clones pronounced him as alive, if exhausted and semi-unconscious, as the copy prodded the original with a foot. That had snapped Tsunami out of her shock as she shoved the clone that had towed the original towards the edge of the property and imperiously ordered it to report Takashi's condition to his teammates. 2 more clones had then been designated to haul the still bleeding Takashi up to her guest room, while another was told to do something about the blood soaking into the ground. Tsunami had then knelt down beside her bawling son and hugged him tightly before ordering Inari to set her 4 largest pots on the stove and fill them to the top with water for her so she could boil some water. She had prayed the task would help break her son out of his extreme state of shock that he'd fallen into sometime around the moment his cries had trailed off. Tsunami had run into the house right after that to gather her first aid kit and an old sheet that could be cut up for bandages. After a moment's hesitation, she'd also grabbed her sewing kit just in case any of the man's injuries needed to be sewn shut. She had then taken everything up to her guest room and shoved the sheet at one of the lingering clones while ordering the fake to tear the sheet into 2-inch wide strips. The other clone had then been instructed to strip Takashi out of his pants and to clean him up so that his wounds could be treated. While they were doing that, she'd hurried downstairs to check on her son and start the water boiling and found Inari standing in the middle of the kitchen shaking as more tears poured unchecked down his cheeks. Her little boy had then looked up at her with tormented eyes that cut sharply through her heart and pierced her soul with an unspeakable pain and a sense of failure for not being able to protect her baby from the harsher aspects of life. Why? Inari had demanded through his tears. Why did he do it? I heard him that first night. He's got a little boy that's younger than me. So why would he do something so stupid? Doesn't he care how much it hurts? Tsunami had only hesitated a brief moment before asking her son what he'd meant because she hadn't known how to answer his question without understanding exactly what it was that he was asking her. Part of her didn't want to understand because she didn't want to know just how much more of her baby's innocence had just been stripped away, while the rest of her knew she had to know in order to help her son come to terms with whatever was bothering him. She felt her heart constrict when she heard Inari's answer, even as she felt relief that it wasn't as terrible as she first believed. I asked him what happened when I saw him stumble out of the forest and he said he was doing his job. Why would he take such a stupid job if it gets him hurt? Doesn't he care that he's hurting his little boy? Why did Ojizen have to hire Shinobi anyway? Why couldn't we just leave and go live somewhere else where Gato wouldn't ever find us? The single mother had done the best she could to answer her son, but she'd been a bit rushed at the time because the knowledge that there was a man upstairs in her guest room, bleeding to death, had never been far from her thoughts. Still, she'd at least given him something to think about other than the near-death state of the injured shinobi. Tsunami made a mental note to speak to her son again first thing the next morning as she collected the cloth from Takashi's head and dipped it in the bowl of cool water, wrung it out, and replaced the cloth, an action that was more about feeling as if she was doing something than about necessity since the man didn't even have a fever. In fact, Takashi's injuries had been nowhere near as severe as she'd expected them to be given the state that he had been found in. Once the worst of the blood had been cleaned away, she'd discovered a rather nasty bruise along the right side of his ribs, the dislocated and discolored joints of his severely swollen left arm, a trio of deep lacerations across his lower back, a shallow slice that ran across the man's jugular, and several smaller scrapes and bruises scattered from head to toe. She'd expected to find deep, life-threatening gashes littering the man's body based upon the amount of blood he'd been covered in when she'd first seen him. She'd nearly thrown up when it dawned on her that most of the blood might have belonged to the man or men that had attacked the shinobi. To keep her mind off the possibility that the man she was treating might have just killed at least one other human being, Tsunami stitched and bandaged the gashes on the man's back. The arrival of Takashi's teammates helped distract her further when the two men quickly and easily dealt with the young man's dislocated shoulder, elbow, and wrist before they tended to the rest of his injuries. Tsunami had fled the room at that point so that she could start supper, only to find that several of the unsettling clones had invaded her kitchen and were cooking the evening meal. She'd been half tempted to chase the fakes out of her kitchen but chose instead to attend to the other chores that she'd left undone in order to help the shinobi, only to find that those two had been taken care of by the clones. After the meal, when the clones had deftly taken care of the cleanup, Tsunami had grabbed the bowl of water and headed upstairs to nurse the shinobi since there was nothing else for her to do and she knew she'd go stir-crazy if she didn't keep her hands occupied. She was just adjusting the light blanket that had been draped over the man, to both protect him from the chill night air and preserve his modesty, when she was startled by the feel of a hand wrapping around her wrist with an iron grip. A soft gasp escaped her lips as she stared at the hand clutching her arm before she looked up to find slightly confused green eyes staring at her. Relief and fear twisted through Tsunami, the former because it was now obvious that the young man would live and the latter because the idea that the man holding her captive had killed hadn't been far from her mind since the moment she first thought it. "Gomen, Tsunami-san, I didn't mean to startle you," Takashi rasped wearily as he released her wrist fairly quickly. "I'm afraid I was a little unsure whether you were a friend or a foe when I didn't recognize the room I found myself in upon waking." "No harm done, Shinobi-san," Tsunami hurriedly assured the man as she calmed her racing heart. Could you tell me how long I've been out and where my teammates are? You've been out somewhere between 6 and 8 hours and your teammates slipped outside after supper in order to check in with the other U's that you have running around, all over our clearing. Arigato, Tsunami-san, for both the information and for taking care of me. Is your son alright? I vaguely recall the boy being the one to find me the moment I returned. I am afraid that I might have unintentionally frightened him by showing up in such a terrible state, covered as I was in my own blood and exhausted to the bone. That was all your blood? It wasn't the blood of your attackers. A bit of it might have been, but for the most part the two rogue shinobi I was fighting were virtually unharmed by the time I captured them and ended the fight. Captured? You mean you didn't kill them? Few shinobi actually enjoy taking the lives of others despite the fact that we carry a reputation for being bloodthirsty killers. Yes, we do kill in the line of our work, but it is usually as a last resort or as part of a desperate attempt to save a life. We might grow numb to violence and bloodshed over time, but most of us are not lawless criminals that sell our skills to the highest bidder just to line our pockets with other people's hard-earned gold. We fight, bleed, and die so that others might live in peace and travel unmolested through the lands. Suma-mason, I should not have assumed. You don't need to apologize, Tsunami-san, I understand why you automatically assumed the worst. I reacted much the same way when I first learned what a shinobi was and what they did. It took me years to understand that we are more like soldiers and policemen all rolled into one than we are like thieves and assassins that move in the shadows. Our goal is to protect those who can't protect themselves, deal with criminals, and fight wars so others might live in peace. It isn't always a glorious job, but it is a job that we can take pride. I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe a shinobi in quite that way before. Tsunami confessed as she silently realized that the man had once again managed to surprise her and give her something to think about. Few people do unless they are living side by side with shinobi, Takashi gently pointed out as he pushed himself up using one arm. What in the world do you think are you doing? Tsunami demanded with a soft gasp the moment she realized that Takashi was trying to get up and hurriedly reached out to push him back down onto the futon. You're in no fit state to get out of bed. I'm fine, ma'am, Takashi insisted as he attempted to sit up a second time. I heal fast and I have things I have to do. Oh, no you don't, mister, you're not getting out of this bed until your injuries heal. I will refuse to stitch up the gashes on your back again if you go and rip out the stitches because you're too damn stubborn to rest when you need it. And I will not have you frightening my son a second time by collapsing in front of him again. You owe him an apology and an explanation. By the way, he's very angry at you right now because he thinks you carelessly tried to get yourself killed when he knows that you have a son waiting for you at home. Tsunami would have laughed at the shocked look on the man's face if not for the seriousness of the situation. At least he was no longer trying to get out of bed. Takashi fell asleep just 10 minutes later. The man's exhaustion had pulled him down into the arms of Morpheus the moment he stopped ignoring the state of his body. Shaking her head, Tsunami collected the bowl of water and the abandoned cloth, which had fallen the first time Takashi had tried to sit up, and left the room. As she slipped down the stairs, she couldn't help but think about how much the man had just reminded her of her son and how Inari used to try and sneak out of bed when he was sick just so that he could chase after Kaiza when her second husband was still alive. Monday, August 11, 2003, late night. Tazuna's home, Nami no Kuni. Kotetsu glanced into each of the cells as he walked by them, checking to confirm that the new prisoners had been secured by Takashi's clones. He was having more than a little trouble wrapping his mind around the fact that Takashi had managed to kidnap Gato right out from under the noses of the bandits that had been lounging about Zabuza's base only to run into the Oni Kyudai just after leaving the base. It never failed to amaze him how hot and cold Takashi's luck tended to run. 1 minute things would be going better than expected and the next everything that could go wrong would go wrong at the worst possible moment. Shaking his head, Kotetsu peered into the holding cell where the two brothers had been secured and frowned. It would have been better to separate the two men but Takashi hadn't made enough cells. Kotetsu absently wished that Yamato had been with them. The Jounin could have easily grown additional cells in the blink of an eye. Well, Takashi could have made more holding cells too, if not for the fact that he'd been rather seriously injured capturing the two missing men. Kotetsu turned away from the cell and grimaced over the reminder of the condition that he and Izumo had found Takashi in once they'd returned to Tazuna's house. Intellectually, he knew that Takashi hadn't been injured too seriously and that most of the injuries had already been taken care of by the bijou the other man carried, Kotetsu and Izumo both aware that the younger Chunin was a Jinchuriki, even though they had no idea which bijou the man held, but the sight of the man's ruined and blood-soaked pants discarded off to one side had drawn them up short. The first thing that had run through Kotetsu's mind when his eyes fell on the ruined pants had been the haunting demand that Takashi's clone had made of Tazuna during their interrogation of the client. Are you going to be the one to explain to my son and my cousin why I won't be coming home if I die here on this island? Even though the question had not been directed at him, Kotetsu couldn't help but wonder if he would one day be responsible for telling Naruto and little Satoshi that Takashi had died on a mission. It was not a task he ever wanted to be called upon to perform. Not just because he'd grown very fond of the younger prankster and the precocious son of his teammate, but because he didn't think he had it in him to break the hearts of the two young boys that thought Takashi hung the moon and stars. Shoving his morbid thoughts out of his mind, he was well aware that Takashi would live and undoubtedly be right as rain before morning. Kotetsu finished checking on their prisoners before he made his way out of the prison. He then joined Izumo on the roof of the makeshift prison so they could watch over the clearing where Tazuna's house had been built, his eyes tracking the numerous Kage Bunshin that were still running about. Kinda makes you feel inadequate and more than a little useless, doesn't it? Izumo inquired some 20 minutes later. Sometimes, mostly it just makes me glad he's on our side, Kotetsu countered. On the plus side, keeping him around certainly keeps things interesting. True. Another 15 minutes of companionable silence passed before Kotetsu asked, so, how bad do you think Naruto-kun is going to prank us once he learns that we weren't around to keep Takashi from getting injured? It'll depend on whether or not he learns the full list of Takashi's injuries, if Takashi ends up with any new scars, and if he gets injured a second time before the end of the mission, Izumo answered after giving the question some thought. We're going to pay dearly. Absolutely. Well, I suppose being pranked to death is far better than dying of boredom. Both 25-year-olds shared a laugh at that before they dropped down off of the prison roof in order to scout the perimeter, check on the state of their injured teammate, and ensure that their client and his family were safely tucked into their beds, or at least make sure they hadn't snuck off on their watch. Tuesday, August 12, 2003, early morning. Tazuna's home, Nami no Kuni. Harry was up with the sun and wishing his internal clock had a snooze button because he really could have used another day or two of rest. His entire body ached and he knew it was because his magical reserves were still rather low. He'd overextended himself during the fight with the Oni Kyudai, and from his stunt with the Kyuubi seal, worse than he'd originally thought he had. That was on top of all the magic he'd been tossing about since arriving in Nami. His injuries had at least finished healing while he'd slept, though the stitches that Tsunami had sewn into the gashes on his back were currently annoying him because his skin had healed right around them. Sitting up with a soft groan, Harry began patting down his body in search of the pocket holding his healing potions only to recall that he'd taken off his cloak for his stroll through Zabuza's base. Knowing that he'd never make it out to where he'd left his cloak and the rest of his supplies without a pain-relieving potion, he summoned an elf to bring him a vial of said potion, and after discovering that he'd been stripped down to just his boxers, a change of clean clothes. Once the potion had taken edge off of his pain, Harry got dressed and went searching for his teammates in order to get an update from them on the status of the mission and talk one of them into cutting out the stitches. He found an angry 8-year-old blocking the stairs leading down to the ground floor first. A foot, sharp in the way that only an angry child's foot could be, connected with his ankle as the kid growled out an angry, "I hate you, you're nothing but a big jerk." If not for the pain potion he'd just ingested, the blow would have set his tender nerves to singing and he probably would have dropped like a rock. If not for the past 3.5 years of training, the blow probably would have knocked him down anyway, or at least set him to howling as he hopped around in pain. As it was, all it did was send a dull throb through his ankle and up his leg. "And good morning to you too," Harry grunted as he picked the kid up and set him off to the side so he could walk down the stairs. It's always nice to meet another cheerful early riser first thing in the morning. He was halfway down the stairs when he sensed a fast-flying object aimed for the back of his head. Sighing, Harry reached up and snagged the shoe the kid had thrown at him out of the air before it could hit him. He let out a soft whistle of appreciation when he found it to be a heavy wooden Geta sandal, that would have left a nasty lump on his noggin if it had hit him. "I appreciate the gesture, kid, but one shoe isn't really very useful, especially not when it's the wrong size," Harry quipped as he gently lobbed the sandal back over his shoulder, without looking, where it clattered harmlessly to the ground when the kid jumped backwards in surprise. "Don't you even care?" the kid demanded as he finally got over the surprise of Harry returning the sandal in the same way it had been delivered. "You'll have to be more specific, Gaki." Don't you care that your kid will be left all alone when you die? How can you be so mean as to leave him? Why do you fight when you know you're going to die? And who would protect my son from the likes of Gato if I am not willing to fight and die to protect him? Harry asked softly in return as he stopped walking and half turned to face the boy. How could I ever look my son in the eye if I cowered behind the fear of death and failed to protect him, his friends, his classmates, and his teachers? Someone has to fight, and if I am not willing to fight for my family, then who will? If I am not willing to risk my life to protect others, then what right do I have to expect others to protect my precious people for me? Harry paused as he watched the kid's eyes grow wide, and he could practically see the little gears turning in the kid's mind as something in Harry's words triggered a memory. Harry waited until the kid focused on him once more before he continued. A great man once told me that it is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. And throughout our lifetime, there will be times when we are faced with the choice of doing what is right over doing what is easy. When I first learned that your grandfather had lied to us about this mission, it would have been easy for us to turn our backs on Nami no Kuni and walk away, but it would not have been right. Harry watched the child for another minute before he turned and continued on his way out of the house. As he stepped outside into the thin, sun-kissed mist that filled the clearing, Harry couldn't help but reflect upon the number of times that Dumbledore's words had given him the courage to do what was right. There were times when he was still incredibly angry with his mentor over the meddling the man had done in his life, but at the same time he was also incredibly grateful to the man for helping to make him who he was today. As he stepped down off of the porch, Harry's eyes automatically cut to the west as he wondered what his friends in the outer countries were doing. It was at that moment that he realized he'd lost touch with the others and that he'd neither written to anyone nor received anything from anyone for nearly a year. A frown tugged at his mouth while guilt pooled in his belly before he forcefully shoved both the guilt and his worry out of his mind. He could rectify the unintentional distance he'd allowed to form between him and his friends and family on the other side of the barrier later. For now, he had a mission to complete. What are you doing out of bed? Izumo demanded as he stepped around the corner of the house and spotted Harry standing in front of the house. Offering deep philosophical advice to all of the children that I run into. Did you wish to hear yours now, or did you want to wait until after breakfast? Did you just imply that I'm immature? I implied nothing, Harry retorted with a smirk when he caught sight of the pouting scowl that Izumo was now leveling at him. All teasing aside, I'm feeling much better than I did yesterday after my fight. I'll be a bit sore for a few hours yet though because I'm still rather exhausted. All I really need is for someone to cut the stitches out of my back before I hunt down something to eat. I'd have grabbed food first, but I thought I'd check in with you guys and see what happened after I crashed. And the philosophical advice you were offering? Tsunami's son took offense to the condition I returned in yesterday, and when he attempted to take me to task for my apparent disregard of my son's feelings, I gave him some food for thought, after I returned the sandal that he attempted to beat me in the head with. Izumo laughed heartily as he pulled out a kunai and gestured for Harry to turn around. Harry complied without any of the hesitation he might have felt 6 months earlier, lifting his shirt up just enough to expose the 3 lines of neat, tiny, and tight stitches that Tsunami had used to close the gashes on his back. As the razor-sharp tip of the kunai nipped and tugged at the threads fused to his skin, Harry focused on Izumo's verbal report after giving a brief prayer of gratitude to whomever it was that had invented pain-relieving potions as each stitch ripped his skin a bit as it was pulled out. Things have been fairly quiet since we returned yesterday afternoon. Your clones had secured the most recent prisoners by the time we got back. Tazuna has been real quiet and jumpy ever since he'd learned you'd been hurt, while Tsunami and her kid have been rather moody. Tsunami nearly skewered a few of your clones when she found them in her kitchen last night, but she eventually let them be as she tended to you personally. Do you know if any of the 5 new prisoners have woken up yet? One of Gato's bodyguards was yelling and cursing a few hours ago according to the clones you have on duty, but other than that, no. When do you think you'll be up to making additional cells? I really don't like the idea of the Oni-Kyudai sharing a cell. We won't need the extra cells, Harry countered as he leaned forward to allow Izumo better access to the lowest line of stitches in response to Izumo tapping on his back. Once I get all of the information I can from the latest 5 prisoners, then we can make arrangements for them to be housed elsewhere. Now that we have Gato, everything else should fall into place fairly easily, providing nothing else goes wrong. What about all of the bandits that are running around terrorizing the villagers? Well, we have several options. We could capture them and send them back to Konoha. We could capture them and turn them over to the villagers. We could just chase them out of Nami no Kuni, or we could dispose of them permanently. The Hokage won't want to deal with them, the villagers will either stone them to death or just set them free, and chasing them out is going to just cause problems in other places, Izumo pointed out as he pulled free the final bit of thread. So basically, we will have to leave them to the mercy of the villagers, which might well see them back on the streets again, or we give them a shinobi's final mercy. Harry asked as he straightened up, pulled his shirt back down, and glanced over his shoulder to meet the gaze of his teammate. Izumo didn't reply. There was no reason for him to say anything further, the answer was plain as day in his eyes. May Merlin, Maeve, and Mungo protect and preserve me from madness and give me the strength to do what I must to protect the innocent, Harry solemnly intoned in English as he continued to hold Izumo's eyes. After a full minute, he tore his gaze away and headed for the temporary prison as he stated, "Thanks for getting rid of the stitches for me, Izumo. I'll be interviewing our newest guests if you need me, or I will once I grab something to snack on." That's it for part 7. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.